No. Kindly activate the interpretation function for the interpreter. Thank you.
Robert Oliphant, Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Foreign Affairs. Dear Mrs. Cheryl, Assistant Deputy Minister for South African Affairs. Excellencies, members of the Diplomatic and Consular Corps, dear members of the Canadian African Diaspora, and the African Canadian Diaspora, member of the African Study Group, dear member of the Canadian International Council, dear guests from all backgrounds, I welcome each of you here in this room and with so many people online, and thank you for accepting our invitation. We are delighted to welcome you in to this highway conference on the importance and role of the African Canadian diaspora in international trade and foreign policy. Nous allons parler de l'importance et du rôle de la diaspora africaine canadienne pour le commerce international et la politique étrangère. C'est la première fois que nous avons cette opportunité de réunir la diaspora pour discuter de ce problème que nous trouvons être essentiel pour le Canada et pour l'Afrique et pour les relations entre le Canada et l'Afrique, spécialement maintenant. The Africa Study Group addresses a variety of themes at our events through a series of discussions, including strengthening Africa-Canada relations, the role and importance of the African Canadian diaspora, African free trade area issues, aspects of global health issues, in particular COVID and post-COVID issues, security and stabilization in Africa as an essential condition for sustainable development, unconstitutional change, changes of government, the impact of violent extremism and terrorism in Africa, and talking about Boko Haram and any other extremist group, security and governance in the Sahel after the withdrawal of French troops from Mali, climate change issues, particularly COP27 and COP28, as well as the UN international diplomacy, democracy and electoral development in Africa. Dear guests, Canada has close ties with Africa, and Canadians of African descent and their descendants have never been more numerous in Canada. In 20 years, the African Canadian diaspora has more than tripled from 300,000 in 2000 to 1.4 billion in 2021. And these figures are set to rise considerably over the coming decades, as the continent is one of the country's main sources of immigration. L'hypothèse sous-jacente de cette conférence, chers amis, est que l'Afrique est un continent dynamique, dont l'importance géopolitique et économique ne cesse de croître, et que la diaspora africaine canadienne peut légitimement jouer un rôle important dans le renforcement des relations entre le Canada et l'Afrique. Depuis plus d'une décennie, l'Afrique est en pleine mutation et le continent devient de plus en plus important pour le reste du monde. Avec la mise en place de l'accord sur la zone de libre-échange continentale africaine, l'Afrique est désormais la plus grande zone de libre-échange du monde, juste après l'Organisation mondiale du commerce. L'Afrique compte plus de 1,4 milliard d'habitants, dont 60% ont moins de 25 ans, et possède 30% des minerais essentiels du monde. Ce qui se passe désormais en Afrique a des implications mondiales en termes de paix et de sécurité alimentaire, de changement climatique, de santé politique, de droits de l'homme, de droits des minorités, de changement climatique, de santé et d'état de droit. Les 54 États africains sont également devenus une force de vote incontestable sur le plan international, notamment aux Nations Unies et dans de nombreux forums de négociations internationales. La conviction que l'Afrique pourrait jouer un rôle au premier plan au cours de ce siècle, tant en termes de puissance que d'importance, se généralise dans le monde entier et des perspectives du siège africain au Conseil de sécurité des Nations Unies se solidifie, comme on l'a vu cette semaine. As a changing geopolitical world requires adapting and adopting diplomatic engagement, the Africa Study Group salutes the government recent effort to strengthen relationships with Africa. Of particular relevance was the visit of the African Union Commission head in the fall of 2022 and the historic first Canada-AU high-level dialogue, which will follow by another second here in Ottawa. The parties have then identified opportunities for increased collaboration on issues of peace and democracy, sustainable development, health, and economic cooperation. They also announced their intention to hold regular high-level dialogue, as well as sectoral dialogue on trade and development, and welcome the granting of privilege and immunity to officials of the African Union Commission. The appointment of a High Commission in Rwanda, as well as a dedicated mission with a permanent observer to the AU in Addis Ababa, are particularly edifying in this respect. Furthermore, during her trip to Kenya and her recent visit to Côte d'Ivoire and South Africa, Minister Jolie expressed her commitment and the commitment of the government to strengthen Canada engagement in Africa. In Canada, a growing Canadian African diaspora is being increasingly recognized as a critical partner in enhancing relations with various nations on the continent. To focus and amplify the voices of the Canadian African diaspora, the Africa Study Group is hosting this private conference to highlight the importance of Canada's African diaspora and how it can strengthen its contribution to enhancing international trade and foreign policy in Canada's relations with African countries. So, without further delay, I would like to turn the floor to the Honorable Oliphant for his chief.
Good morning, bonjour tout le monde. C'est vraiment un grand plaisir d'être ici avec tous. It's always a wonderful opportunity for me to engage, to look around at the variety and excitement of African diaspora in Canada. Dr. Magora, thank you for this go. Thank you for your opening remarks, front row. And for the Africa Study Group, members of the Africa Study Group, thank you for engaging not only today, but regularly in the issues that Canada needs to focus on as we approach Africa and the changing nature of that continent. Your Excellencies, to the diplomatic corps who are here today or online, welcome. And to all of you who want to be Your Excellencies in the future, who are studying at Carleton or St. Paul or University of Ottawa, welcome as well. I also want to acknowledge our Assistant Deputy Minister, Cheryl Urban, and officials from Global Affairs Canada who are here today. And that you should recognize that to have an Assistant Deputy Minister here doesn't happen all the time. And so Cheryl, thank you for being here. And also thank you for the engagement that you are pushing and pulling and prodding in the government of Canada to keep Africa at the forefront of our international agenda. Canada and Africa have had decades of important and meaningful relationships. We have had shared successes, and we also have faced challenges together. as Canada has reached out to the many countries, regions, and peoples of the African continent. We've maintained relationships on the continent for many decades through our work with individual African countries, with the regional bodies, the regional economic communities, as well as the African Union. And we've shared the world stage with Africa in many, many places. The institutions and the people of Africa are constantly changing, and Canada has constantly had to change its position as we approach Africa. Now, the African continent attracts much attention in the media from time to time, and Dr. Gangura raised some of the challenges that we see in the news regularly. And while the challenges dominate, and those could be unconstitutional changes of government, they could be natural disasters, they could be in the south or the north or the east or the west or Central Africa. Today, I want to be focusing, as I'm hoping our government continues to focus, on the opportunities of Africa. When I watch the news, too often I see the problems of Africa. And what we are trying to do in the government of Canada today is to be mindful of the challenges that Africa and Africans face, but also to lift up the opportunities that we are seeing. Africa is growing in its importance on the world stage, and it is beginning more and more to take its rightful place on multilateral bodies, international institutions and organizations, and with key geopolitical powers. Africa is a force in our world that Canada not only needs to recognize, but learn to cooperate with in new and changing ways. Africa is increasingly important economically as well. It has rich resources beneath the ground that Canada has worked with for decades, but even more importantly, it has rich resources above the ground, with a youthful population, with an entrepreneurial spirit, with women and men, girls and boys who are eager to take their place in the world in the changing economy of Africa. Canada's well-being, its prosperity, and its security are increasingly important on a robust, comprehensive, and strategic partnership with Africa at a continental, a regional, bilateral, and a people-to-people level. And I want to say that that is at the core of my work over the last few years in working on a strategic relationship with Africa. And I want to begin right now to say, this is not about us helping Africa. That era is over. It is now about engaging with Africa in a partnership that acknowledges that Canada needs Africa. That Canada's future, you can clap for that one. Canada's future well-being, our prosperity, our international security, our borders, everything we do in Canada is dependent upon a successful Africa and a successful partnership with Africa. Canada's population, and look at me, we're aging. Look at me, the only white guy. Look at Africa, a young, dynamic population. I won't give you the statistics because you just know them intuitively. When you look at, it doesn't matter whether you're in Kenya or Burkina Faso, whether you're in Zambia or in Algeria, the population is young, it's dynamic, and it is growing. Canada needs to have a relationship. We need markets. We need institutions. We need educational opportunities for Canadians that are happening in Africa. Canada's population is not only aging, but we've entered a post-industrial society where the service sector, information, communications, and technology sector, the knowledge sector is growing every day. And it adds to our prosperity. But the youthfulness and the emergence of an African middle class is absolutely essential for Canada to maintain its prosperity. And we've had strong diplomatic relations. I just need a glass of water. A little bit of a cold, that's why I'm not hugging you as much as I usually do.
Canada's had diplomatic relations for over 70 years on the African continent. We've played a key role in educational, health, and social development with strategic engagements in many countries over the decades. It has been, we as Canada have been at the forefront of natural and humanitarian crises with financial and technical help. We're not going to stop doing that ever. We recognize that there is an inequity in our world, and Canada is a prosperous country that needs to be with Africa in its development. So we'll be there. But it is also assisted in constitutional frameworks, building electoral capacity, establishing democratic legislative practices in many countries that have won their independence from former colonial powers. We have tried to be there as a non-colonial power, helping build Indigenous, democratic, meaningful institutions in country after country. We've tried to help grow educational institutions of higher learning as well, to add to research on key issues, to talk about agriculture, geology, sustainable practices, and to continue the expansion of civil and human rights as a foundation of the prosperity of the African people. We believe that good human rights, good practices in that area, good civil rights, good democratic institutions lead to more prosperity. We can do that while respecting African traditions and post-colonial aspirations. I'm not talking about a neo-colonialism. I'm talking about honoring African practices and understandings of human relations, while also reminding people that their prosperity is better when women and girls have full rights in their societies, when people who are different have full rights in the societies. That leads to investment, and that leads to prosperity. Canada has tried to earn the respect of Africans and their governments as a country that shows respect, has assisted in times of difficulty, promoted best practices of international engagement and corporate social responsibility. As I said, Africa is changing. And Canada's engagement with Africa has to change as well. I think as I've traveled in Africa, I've been to over 20, about 25, 27 countries in Africa. Canada's reputation is still good. It's partly good because of the diaspora in Canada that tells the story of why we want to be engaged. But we're increasingly seen as absent in key areas of economic development. We're not strong enough in Africa. Our mining companies have been engaged, and I think some of the best mining companies in the world are Canadian mining companies, mindful of local benefit, of good corporate social responsibility. But other areas of engagement are still underdeveloped. They're still in their infancy. When I'm in Africa, I see the need for sustainable energy. You can't build an economy without good energy, and you can't keep the economy going without it being sustainable. Canada has abilities in the energy sector. Africa needs that engagement. Africa can feed itself. Africa has the resources and the talent and the natural resources and the people talent to feed itself and the world. But that means Canada's agri-food business needs to be in Africa. We need to help with sustainable practices on growing food in ways that have higher protein content, higher yields, and can actually lead to good sustainable jobs. Surrounded by oceans, Africa can engage meaningfully in what's called the blue economy. And that's both for food and for energy and for transportation. Canada has some resources in that area as well, and we can help develop that. Tourism, trade, planned migration, exchange of students and teachers between Canada and the African continent are important, and the diaspora is key to that. The diaspora community in Canada are our interpreters, not just language interpreters, but cultural interpreters. The African diaspora is our best resource for understanding how to increase trade, how to increase tourism, how to increase the prosperity of both our continent, our country and that continent. The starting point, though, is true partnership. The starting point is listening to what Africa is asking for and starting with that as our primary mandate. So we start with the African Union. We have now appointed a full-time representative at the African Union in Addis. And that's an important signal to say that their Agenda 2063, the Africa we want, has to lead the way on what we want to do. But then, as Africans continue to tell me, we also have to be clear with what we want. Transparent, open. Let African countries, businesses, people, institutions know that we're not there as charitable givers. We're there as equal partners. And we want to look eye to eye in every one of those relationships. So what we've learned in our relationship with Indigenous people in this country is nothing about us without us. So nothing about Africa without Africa. African engagement. And that's where you play an important role in building the bridges, being the interpreters, engaging with us, telling us about the opportunities, helping build your own lives in Canada, while helping people in Africa build their lives in meaningful, sustainable, prosperous ways. We recognize the challenges. We recognize that there are 35 conflicts going on the African continent right now. Peace building, peacekeeping, reconciliation, understanding the traumas of post-colonial life, borders that were often artificial, is something that we'll be mindful of. Recognizing the sovereignty of every state of Africa is critical to our success. And making sure that those states, the heads of government, the heads of state, the ministers, play important roles in every forum in this on this planet. That means African Union being engaged fully at the G20, and Canada has helped lead the way in that. Finding ways for reform at the United Nations to make sure African voices are heard in the corridors of power. Canada needs to speak with Africa to ensure that that happens. All of this is about shared prosperity, it's about reducing poverty, assisting in humanitarian crisis, supporting women and youth, collaborating on global priorities, advancing shared values and interests, and strengthening peace and security. I was recently in both Namibia and Zambia, a little stopover in South Africa in between. And again, it was echoed that the African countries want more Canada. And so we are engaging in a partnership. There will be a strategic document that comes out. But don't wait for the document to know that Canada is engaged. Canada is already doing work in Africa, and we're changing every day how we work. We'll work on that diplomatically, work on that economically in the trade area, and will continue to be a leading supporter of humanitarian aid and development work. Canada's there. We're listening to you. Many of you have already met with me about this strategic partnership we're trying to form this day. I'm happy to engage with you again. I'll be asking for the notes from today's meeting to hear what you have to say. I will acknowledge that I was overdressed. That's because I have a funeral to go to this afternoon. I'm a member of the diplomatic corps, but it also meant I could be here in person. And that's important for me to see your faces. I will be listening to your note, to what you have to say. We'll continue to engage. Thank you very much.
Merci, Honorable Oliphant, for pour cette excellente présentation et cet excellent discours qui nous éclaircit dans ce que nous sommes venus faire ici. Thank you so much. And I would like to use this opportunity to thank a number of people who are here. And I can see the team of the African diplomat corps, the ambassador from Rwanda. I can see many other people, like the representative of the ambassador from Ghana. Thank you, brother, for being here. The representative of Algeria and Madagascar. And I know that we have many other ambassadors online. Unfortunately, I know that you have to go, you have to leave because of the fever. And I would like to address my condolences for this very sad event. It's always difficult for a country when you lose a diplomat. Toutes mes condoléances au corps diplomatique africain et international. Et je voudrais ajouter sur les changements qui ont été faits. La communauté, la diaspora est très reconnaissante du fait que nous avons constaté avec beaucoup de plaisir que l'actuel doyen du corps diplomatique canadien en Afrique vient d'Afrique. Et c'est l'ambassadeur du Maroc. C'est aussi un honneur qui est fait à la diaspora. Et nous félicitons l'ambassadeur du Rwanda, sa nomination en tant que président du corps diplomatique africain. Et nous lui souhaitons la bienvenue. Et l'Africain continuera de travailler avec vous pour, dans les vidéos qui viennent d'être dénoncées par l'honorable. Dear guests, we have two panels, but before going to the panels, we have our main speaker, who is Mr. Winston Tettey. He's originally from Ghana. Exceptionally today, I will be mentioning the countries of the speakers, so that you recognize the diaspora value behind each of those speakers. It's very important, I believe. So the first person to talk today will be Mr. Winston Tettey, professor at the University of Toronto, Scarborough, chair of the Continental African Diaspora Scholar Network. And he is the president of the and Vice-Chancellor designated for the Carleton University, starting January 1st. I would like to stress that we have approximately about 100, 200 people online from everywhere in Canada and in Africa. And I welcome those people who are in Africa, and despite the late time from South Africa to Ethiopia to Morocco, I welcome them and thank you very much for taking the time to be online with us today. It's very important to us. Sans trop tarder, je vais passer la parole au professeur Vincent. Professor Tettey, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Sheikh, and good afternoon, everyone. I hope you can hear me. Yeah?
Yes.
Okay, great. So I appreciate the opportunity to be with you, even if it's physically removed. I think that we're all bound together by this commitment to engaging in a conversation that allows us to chart a path forward for mutual prosperity, mutual benefit. I hope that the remarks that I have to share in some way is able to add to the deliberations in a way that is meaningful, thoughtful, and shakes us out of what I would describe as relative slumber as we engage the diaspora, the Canadian society at large, and the African continent as mutual partners, building on, as you've heard before, a history of collaboration that requires us to continue to sustain it, to nurture it, and to make sure that it's nourished to get to the outcomes that we're looking for. You all have heard about the fact that the world around us has changed. Migration has led to different kinds of configurations. People are no longer bound and limited by territory and are able to straddle the world from different locales. And we have the benefit of a huge African diaspora population here in Canada that is willing to be a partner in this effort. So what I'm going to do this afternoon is probably nothing new to a lot of you who are probably more conversant with the realities of the Canada-African partnership and some of the aspirations that we have as a continent and moving forward to a world that we want. And in fact, some would argue a world that Africa is already creating for the purpose of getting to those outcomes that are articulated in Agenda 2063. I just want to give you an outline of what I'm going to touch on, and hopefully don't eat too much of your time and give you the opportunity to have the deliberations that I think are the heart of why we are all gathered here this afternoon. So what I'm going to do, and I think it will reiterate some of the points that you've heard before, which is about why Canada and Africa need each other. I think it's important to conceptualize this relationship as one of mutual interests and mutual prosperity, and not a one-dimensional flow of largesse from a charitable benefactor to a recipient that makes no contribution to that relationship. So I think it's important to couch this in terms of what we need of and from each other. I would touch a bit on the imperative of acting now, because we don't have the luxury of having to wait forever to see the mutuality of outcomes that we are all claiming we are aspiring to. And I'll then zero in on the importance and role of the African diaspora in Canada as a strategic partner in this effort. And because I'm an educator, I'll segue a little bit to talk about the higher education sector in particular and what its role can be as a catalyst for the kind of outcomes that we're looking for. And I just want to take a moment here to remind all of us that when we're talking about this relationship, whereas the topic today emphasizes trade, and it's important to understand that those outcomes that we're looking for are not going to be achievable if some fundamental building blocks of what is required for a society that is mature in terms of inclusion needs to have. And that is why it's important that as we talk about these things, that we don't talk about them in isolation, but we look at the coming together of different elements of this partnership that is mutually reinforcing and allows us to get to specific outcomes. I think that the higher ed sector has a particular role in advancing that work. I think, we talk a lot about values and principles that undergird partnership with Africa. I think it's important to remind ourselves of those values, but also to critique the manifestations of those values in terms of the disconnect between what we say and what it is that we deliver on. And so I'll throw some ideas out for consideration as you go into deliberations. And finally, I'll make the case for why I think name matters. And so what we call this initiative is absolutely critical to the valency that we bring to it, both in substance and symbolically. So why does the partnership matter? I think Agenda 2063 sets the framework to guide what it is that we want to do. And I think that the shared values that are at the heart of that document are clear. And I think that, the Honorable Parliamentary Secretary did touch on some of those. which is the commitment to inclusive growth, to sustainable development as a fundamental ethos of what drives collaboration amongst partners. That it's important that we look at optimizing the use of Africa's resources for the benefit of all Africans. And I think this is absolutely important, particularly with regard to some of the challenges that we've seen with extractive industries and Canada's implication historically in some of these initiatives. That's important that the emphasis on the benefit for all Africans be a clarion call for all of us. And then we have to not shy away from some of the challenges that continue to be present on the continent. And so how do we ensure that we're pursuing an integrated, prosperous, and peaceful Africa that is driven by its own citizens and representing a dynamic force in the international arena? Those of you who followed the deliberations at the last General Assembly of the United Nations heard some African leaders talk about the inequity in the global governance architecture and the importance of having to do that. But we also know that those things are related to where you sit in terms of your economic muscle. And so for Africa to be able to have its pride of place in the global community of nations, it's important that we're able to provide the building blocks that allows it to have the kind of voice that is necessary to be a global player. So as we look at all of these aspirations and goals, the question then becomes, do we acknowledge that some progress is being made? And do we still have opportunities that Canada can tap into? And I think that, Africans will be the first to acknowledge that as much as there's been progress, that there's still a lot left to be done. There's a lot that, is desired. And it's important that as partners come to the table to do this work together, that we are not oblivious to these challenges, and that we need to make sure that we are, in fact, just as the Hippocratic Oath does with doctors, that we're not doing harm, that we are, in fact, helping to elevate, we're helping to make better, that we're helping to build an Africa that indeed is mutually prosperous and flourishes for all Africans, as well as those who choose to partner with the continent. Now, there are opportunities here that I think others are seeing, and I think that from what we've heard so far, Canada is seeing those opportunities as well and recognizing them. But there's a difference between seeing and recognizing and actualizing what is required to make you, a key player in those opportunities. We know that Africa is certainly a potential huge market, both in terms of the size of the population, the middle class that is continuing to burgeon over the course of time and is projected to continue to do so. We have a young population that provides both a demographic dividend as well as a talent pool of what is possible for the continent. And those who lock arms with these young people for the betterment of Africa are going to be those who are part of that future that Africa is carving for itself. And so it's important that we don't lose sight of the fact that that demographic dividend, if not properly nurtured and supported, that it can become, the opposite of what a dividend is supposed to do, that it can become a power keg of disruption, of dissent, of chaos, because of the possibility that if they're not part of the success that we're talking about, that the answer to that may be backlash. So the population is both an asset and a potential source of trouble if we don't mobilize and do what we need to do to ensure that these young people are not just bringing their talent to the table, but they are seeing the benefit of their contributions to our societies. Now, we all know that with the Continental Free Trade Agreement, the potential to mobilize across the continent is huge. And as much as there are still teething issues, and some would say more than teething issues with regard to the rollout of the Continental Free Trade Area, that this has potential, and we need to look at how Canada can position itself to be able to avail itself of the potential benefits that come with that. And if you're a laggard in this respect, by the time you come to the trough, there may not necessarily be a seat for you at the table. So we need to be proactive, just like others are doing. Well, for example, recognize the fact that China has been very actively engaged on the continent, mobilizing and putting forward key strategic, frames for looking at how they work with the continent. Critique certainly is, as a political scientist, I'm not averse to that, but this is not the place for me to do that today. Just want to articulate what it is in terms of the opportunities that others are seeing. We have, the Koreans have been able to pull together an African-Korean partnership through the summits that they've arranged. India has done the same thing. Russia is doing the same thing. So the question is, what is it that these folks are seeing that we're not seeing? And I believe that it's not a question of us not seeing it. It's just a question of us not acting, as quickly as we need to if we're going to be players in this space. And there's so much we can do drawing on the historical goodwill that we have with Africa. And we have had a good relationship with Africa. We have had the benefit of goodwill. But I think that goodwill can dissipate very quickly when the exigencies of the moment require a different kind of approach to partnership, and we're found wanting or absent at the table. And I think that our leadership as a country would acknowledge that, in fact, we are, in some respects, absent. And I think that has been articulated clearly this afternoon. Now, the question for me then is, are we late to the game? And I don't think we are. We may be lagging behind. And we know, for example, that between 2001 and 2018, the value of global exports from Africa, went from, to Africa went from about $1 billion to $3.3 billion. Canada was able to capture just, less than 1% of that additional global opportunity, right? So there is a way in which we are, even as our relationship and our trade with Africa continues to grow, that we're not probably seizing the potentials as much as we could. So what we need is a coherent, collaborative, forward-looking strategy that reflects our commitment to Africa's aspirations as articulated in 2063. And we have to do that in a way that is substantively superior to our competitors. We know that on the continent, there's a lot of critique of these partners that are engaged in the continent. And so how can Canada isolate itself for special attention as a partner of choice? And I think historically, we have come to the table with certain values and certain principles and certain ways of engaging that have been lauded. How might we seize upon these as we launch into this new era of collaboration with a huge number of other powerful countries that are competing for attention, that are competing for a place, and that are competing for the prosperity that Africa's future promises? And this is where I think the role of the diaspora becomes really important. And I was glad to hear the affirmation that the Honorable Parliamentary Secretary, talked about of the role of the African diaspora in Canada and the importance of that. Unfortunately, though, that is not something that is widely known. And there's a tendency for most people in Canada to look at Africa and Africans as a deficit, as a burden, as opposed to an asset that I think if we put our minds together appropriately, we can leverage for mutual benefit. You have a huge community of Africans who are committed to Canada and to their continent. And this is not an either-or proposition where your loyalty is somehow stymied by your fiscal location. These are individuals who demonstrated over and over again their commitment, their contributions to this country. But I understand that in a world that is global, in a world where we do come from multiple places, that where identities are multifaceted, that we can in fact be able to be bridge builders across our different locales. And this is a huge asset that I think we ignore to our peril. We also see through the diaspora the value that Africa is in fact giving to Canada. And I think it's important to look at that dimension of this relationship when we talk about the Africa-Canada partnership. You just have to look at the number of healthcare professionals in our country and look at, particularly in rural communities, where a lot of African doctors, nurses, and so on are helping to elevate healthcare, to support healthcare in those places. We have a lot of Africans who are in all walks of life making their contributions to Canada. But they don't have to do that without also making a contribution to their continent. And so what the government and people of Canada have in the diaspora is a willing, committed group of people who want to work together for the betterment of Canada and for the betterment of their continent. That asset you cannot put a quantity on, that asset you cannot buy. And so to have that asset handed to you as part of what you need to be able to foster this relationship is something to be lauded, but it's also something that cannot be taken for granted. It needs to be corralled in a way that allows us to mobilize, to bring visibility to what it is that we're trying to do, and to be able to bring the kind of expertise that is necessary. The diaspora provides us with the kinds of intercultural competencies and fluencies that are necessary to have a relationship that is anchored in mutuality, a relationship that is anchored in common purpose, and a relationship that allows us to flourish in ways that are mutual. And treat all of us not to ignore this community. The fact is that the number of Africans in Canada is growing. And over the last few decades, those numbers, are continuing to increase. And Statistics Canada data shows that the Black African population now constitutes the largest Black population in terms of migrants coming to Canada, that about a third of the Canadian immigrant population comes from Africa. And we have folks that are not necessarily, and I think it's important to make this point, because a lot of times we equate Africa with Black people, but Africa has more than, it's probably among the most diverse of continents you can find. So we have, among the South Asian population, we've got a lot of people who have their provenance on the African continent. We have Arab Canadians whose geographical origins are in Africa. And of course, we've got a significant number of Black Africans here as well as white Africans. And our ability to mobilize all of these groups for common purpose is something that is not just the responsibility of the Canadian government, but I think is the responsibility of the diaspora itself. That if we're going to be able to be a partner, we need to be able to get together, define our priorities, build some consensus around those priorities, and be able to come to the table with a voice that is united, a voice that is solidly anchored in a commitment to the continent, so that we can then engage with other partners who share our goals, who share our purposes. I think, I want to make a point here. I said earlier in my outline that I'll talk a bit about the higher education sector. And that is where I come from. And that is where I think, we have the makings of what is required to build not just an Africa that is prosperous, but Africa that is led by a conscientious group of leaders who embrace a certain ethos that I think we, can proudly say is reflected in Canadian society, even as we critique the shortcomings of our own society. There's still a lot that I think that we can learn. And I think working with our colleagues on the continent, anything from AI to energy independence, to food security, to ecological stewardship, and all of those things are things that the higher education sector can help to promote, because all the things that you'll be talking about this afternoon with regard to trade or foreign policy and so on are not going to be sustainable if they're not anchored in a set of considerations or an ethos that is necessary to foreground these things in setting shared values. And so I entreat all of us from across the humanities, social sciences, and the natural sciences to be part of this conversation about how we move Africa forward in partnership with Canada. Questions of ethics are absolutely critical. Questions about mutual coexistence are important to address the issues that we have with conflict and so on. And so I think the higher ed sector can be a huge catalyst, particularly on a continent where, research and development, resources are very thin, where scholarly output is barely 1% of the global total, where, participation in higher education is the lowest across, the world. That is important that we're able to galvanize and build the capacity necessary to pursue the kinds of aspirations that we're talking about here this afternoon. And so I would entreat you to look at organizations like the Continental African Diaspora Scholars Network, Canada, to look at the broader higher educational sector and see how we may be able to bring them together to be partners in enriching the capacity of African countries to be able to pursue the work that is done. Because if we go back to the old order, where we provide experts, then we're not actually creating the sustainable societies necessary. And I think, again, this is where the diaspora is important, that instead of looking at the diaspora here as a loss, as a brain drain, let's look at them as catalysts for brain circulation that allows us to be able to give back, because Canada is benefiting from the investment that Africans have made in some of these people. And I think that it, redounds on us to be able to give back in ways that facilitate the mutual flow of talent, knowledge, and so on. I think Honorable Oliphant talked about the enthusiasm, the energy that you see when you're on the continent with these young people. It's palpable. And I have had the privilege of engaging with a number of these in terms of their entrepreneurial skills, in terms of their passion for innovation. We need to be there working and lifting these folks up so that their talents can help to elevate the continent to the kind of prominence that it deserves. And so I leave you with a couple of critical questions in terms of the principles that should undergird this work. It seems to me that the rhetoric is great, but how it gets manifested is important. So to what extent would any framework, policy, approach, or whatever we call it, is going to embrace? And are we going to be pursuing an effort that is mutually, valorizing, that is mutually empowering, that promotes mutual accountability? And I totally agree with the comment that was made earlier about the importance of those accountability mechanisms, but also open to critique of ideas, perspectives, and experiences and ways of knowing that are not necessarily, reflective of the old order of we know it all. There's a lot that I think we can learn from our African colleagues and partners. And our diaspora community becomes that conduit that allows us to do that. We need to be truly equitable and inclusive in our engagement with the continent. And we need to be committed to the long haul of a sustainable stewardship of that relationship. If this becomes just a flavor of the month kind of initiative, that is not one that allows us to look at the long term, then it becomes more transactional than transformative. And I think that we need to commit to a transformative agenda that is beneficial not just to Canada, but to Africa. And as an African who understands the importance of names and naming, I think what we call this initiative matters. If we talk about it as an approach or a framework of a strategy, it signals the valency that we put on it. And so I would entreat all of those who are engaged in this conversation to truly think about the relationship between what we call this initiative, because we do have strategies with other parts of the world. And so why is Africa not deserving of the same full panoply of comprehensive, holistic engagement that we see in other places? And what we call this, therefore, would matter to our partners as to whether or not we're serious about this endeavor. So on that note, I just want to say, once again, thank you also very much for the opportunity to share these remarks, for your commitment to the work that is before us. And I wish you all every success in the deliberations that would happen the rest of today and in the period ahead. I'm looking forward to being able to see this work come to fruition in a tangible commitment on the part of all of us as Canadians working in partnership with our partners on the continent. So thank you also very much, and I'll hand it back to you, Sheikh.
Thank you so much, Professor Tettey. Merci, Professor Tettey, for these excellent remarks. And I believe that some diplomats and Mr. Oliphant will have to leave us now. Merci beaucoup, Monsieur Oliphant, de votre présence. We will now continue. I have been asked by the Secretariat of African Study Group of the Canadian International Council that I should not talk too much today. So I will not talk too much. And thank you so much again, Professor Tettey. And now we will go to the heart of the discussion here. We have two panels. The first panel will discuss the issue of how does the Canadian African diaspora matter and trade economic picture. This will be moderated by Professor Akuffo, Edward, Head Political Science Department, University of the Fraser of British Columbia. I have to emphasize that we have two moderators because we have two panels. The first one will be Professor Akuffo, and the second one will be Professor Thomas Tieku, who is right now in London, Ontario. Professor Akuffo is here, and he came as a witness. He appears as a witness before the Senate Standing Committee on International Trade and Foreign Affairs 2 days ago. And that's the second time that he did it. And he decided to stay here, to pay for his hotel, to pay for his ticket, in order to participate in this session. So, thank you so much. To you and to the person I used to call my father. Thank you for doing this for the community. The second speaker on this panel will be Udo. And I will ask now all those panelists to join the panel. And we start the discussion. Professor Akuffo, the floor is yours. Yeah, I think somebody missing. Yeah, it's okay. It's Germaine who sent us Germaine Basita, who is the co-chair of the Canada for Africa group. Unfortunately, she couldn't be here. He sent us a recording that we could not download, but we are still working on it. Before the panel starts, I would like to acknowledge the presence of First Secretary of Ambassador for Morocco, and welcome him. I think he's here. Yeah. Yeah, indeed, you're a member of this panel. And you're the only francophone of the panel, but there is a translate interpretation for you. And so feel free to speak in fact. We are, as you know, we are all bilingual in Canada. So feel free to speak in one of the official languages. Okay, thank you so much, Bouka. Again, the floor is yours. Good afternoon. Hello. Good afternoon, everyone. Deputies, Elren, and Your Excellencies, and the African community. It's a pleasure to have each and every one of you here this afternoon, those who are joining us online. So this first panel is going to try to answer the question, why does the Canadian African diaspora matter? And we are going to look at this question from different angles, including trade, economic relations broadly, and also in terms of cultural, among others. I'm Akuffo, and I'm an associate professor in the Department of Political Science at the University of Fraser. And my work here focuses on Canadian foreign policy, studying Canada-Africa relations, or Germaine, in fact. Also focusing on security issues. Our first panelist is going to be Susan Namglin-Dua. I hope I mentioned my sister's name very well. Who is Executive Director of the African Trade Desk here in Ottawa. The next on the list is Elise Legault from One Canada, and who is the Director of the One campaign. This will be followed by Dr. Yaovi Bouka, who is the President of the Force African, President of Force Leadership Africain. And we have the next on the list, Germaine Basita, who is the co-chair of the Canada-Africa Study Group. And last but not the least will be Dr. Suleiman Wahad, who is joining us, who's right beside me. And the name of the organization is on the stage. I'm the head of the Port of the States. Okay, right. Thank you very much. So just panelists, to allow us time for questions, may I please ask that we try to keep our remarks under 7 minutes. So we can have the audience participating. We have just about an hour and 40 minutes for this panel. And so please, yes, let's begin with the first on the list. Susan, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much. And I have 7 minutes, so I'm gonna say that most diplomatic thing to say is all protocols are observed. It is a pleasure to be here. And I'm gonna do the simplest thing, which is storytelling. So we have had from Oliphant, and we've had from Professor Wisdom. And we covered both the political will and the academic will. And when it comes to Africa, those two are always, I mean, like you could fill books in this room with the policies, with academic papers that talk about the issue we want to talk about. In my life, in my place where I live is where the two meet, where life happens. So 24 years ago, today, almost exactly to the hour, I became a landed immigrant in Canada. When I landed at the airport, I was fully Ugandan. I was Ugandan as Ugandan can be, and I had a passport. It was a Ugandan passport. And then I got this paper that said I was a landed immigrant. That's good. Okay. I wanted to come to Canada, and that was exciting. In a way, the Canadian weather is, it was a freezing rain day. So I got introduced to the freezing rain on the first day. That's all good. 24 years later today, I have a Canadian passport. That's lovely, I'm a Canadian. But I'm no less Ugandan on this day than I was on that day that I landed. What I have done in the 24 years, I've contributed to Canada. I've contributed physically in work, but I've contributed 3 other Canadians. One of whom is somewhere in this room, he'll raise his hand, and is so that's a perfect contribution. Sorry. However, this concept of, so what we're talking about today, the importance of the Canadian diaspora to increase trade between Canada and Africa. For me, it is who I am. I am Ugandan, I'm Canadian. When on that day when I'm really tired, I'm really, really upset, I think in Uganda. That's my mother tongue. When I'm tired and I'm ready to sleep, I think in Uganda, I'll translate it in English. I have not managed to translate it in French, which is a good thing because then it will go through multiple translation. It will come back out and I can speak it out either in English or in Uganda. But when it comes to trade, when it comes to this, the whole idea that the diaspora, if I look across this room, in this room here, there is multiple countries, multiple languages, and people that are passionate about Canada and passionate about Africa. We can contribute. Is there a question? We can contribute. We can contribute. Business leaders, there's leadership in this room. The knowledge base that we have in this room that is not being tapped because we are not engaging the diaspora. It's such a shame because we are leaving the most valuable resource that can help this conversation in the table, like Professor Wisdom has said. In here as leaders, I mean, like when I look at the panel, I'm going, Mother Africa, you have contributed to Canada. You contributed everything. As when it comes to trade, the whole Africa population is over 1.4 billion right now, projected to be 2.5 billion by 2040. Canada has a handful of trade commissioner services. These people work so hard, but they cannot reach the corners of Africa as the diaspora can. Between the two speakers that went before me, they talked about the translation. Now, when I talked about translating, I can translate English, Luganda, Swahili and all that, but I can translate culture. When a Ugandan or when an African says this, you can hear it in English. But maybe that's not what it really means in English. We need that counter translation. So that the diaspora can contribute that. The diaspora can contribute in cultural diplomacy, soft power. You don't shake the hand that way. When you talk to the elders, you say, I can sit here and talk to my sister on this side, brother on this side, but I can equally bounce baby under a mango tree and make a business deal. And I'm seated right here. Can I contribute to this? Yes, I can. Policy and advocacy, we've already talked about. The last one that I've been talked with before my brother taps me on the head is the part about knowledge and skills transfer. The diaspora can transfer the skills that we have learned in this country and transfer them to Africa much better than a person who looks at it academically. And I shouldn't say that because I'm an academic facility, but we can transfer this knowledge deeper into the continent, for the continent that we all love, and make this relationship between Africa and Canada work. The diaspora is the most secret, powerful weapon that Canada has to move this process forward.
Yeah.
Thank you very much, Susan. You did great. You actually did less than 7 minutes, which is great. Please, Elise.
Thank you. I'll do my best to also. I'll try to meet your record. Hi, everybody. I want to thank you particularly Dr. Cheryl for l'invitation. So my name is Elise Legault. I'm the Canada Director for the One campaign. So in trying to answer the question of what can the Canadian African diaspora do in terms of Canada's foreign affairs engagement with the continent, there's lots that can be done. I'll start with why I'm here, why this matters to one. So one is a global advocacy organization. Our mission is to fight for a more just world by demanding the investments needed to create economic opportunities and healthier lives in Africa. Now, who can speak to this mission with credibility? First, obviously, people living on the African continent and African countries, and that's why as one, we are increasingly going into the direction of taking cues and direction from our colleagues on the continent in terms of what they're hearing from their governments, from the population, in terms of what people need and want from countries like Canada. But we're sitting here in Canada, and decision makers, Canadian politicians, if we're being frank, don't care that much about what people around the world, they care, but they care first and foremost about people who vote here in Canada and what they think. So who are the people that can make that link between the desires, aspirations of people on the continent and just the political reality of here in Canada is very much Canadian African diaspora, because people are citizens here, they vote, they're economic contributors to the country, so they matter very much to elected officials here. So the diaspora can be a powerful voice, and not just in terms of the domestic concerns of diaspora communities, but also on these broader global questions like what are Canada's trade relations with African countries, or the diplomatic relations. And we all know of very, very knowledgeable, powerful lobby groups that exist. When you talk about APAC in the US, pro-Israel lobby, everyone knows who they are. Everyone knows they're very powerful. When we talk about the Ukrainian Canadian Congress, everyone knows they're a very strong political force here in Canada. So there is much more, I think, that could be done from the Canadian African diaspora to make its voice, even louder than it is. I think it's becoming increasingly loud, and that's very positive, but much more could be done. And I guess or my contribution to this, to state the obvious, I'm not a member of the Diaspora committee. You can tell from my very typical Quebec last name. But one is an advocacy organization. So what I'll do is I'll just share a couple of reflections about how any group can develop powerful common voice as a group. So basically, some of the key components of advocacy that any group, I think, can follow to make sure their voices are heard. So, one thing is to try to have a common goal, and that's not an easy thing because, as Suzanne was saying, obviously, multiple countries, languages, experiences, but there are things that the community all want the same thing, and you can have kind of longer vision, stretch vision, like things that might not seem attainable. It could be something like, we'd like in 15 years for Canada not to give foreign aid anymore to African countries because it's not going to be needed anymore. That could be kind of a stretch goal. And then shorter term, more specific, ideally winnable goals is always a good idea. So things that are very concrete, like specific policy change that you want to see, specific financial investments you want to see. So, for example, I told you about one's vision and long-term mission about creating economic opportunities and healthier lives in Africa. Now, for us right now in Canada, one of the things that we've been advocating for is a strong Canada-Africa strategy that brings together trade, development, and diplomacy. And we've been saying that this should come with an investment of around $2.5 billion over 5 years, because that's about what the Indo-Pacific strategy got. So if there's no money or no real investment behind the strategy, I think some people might say, is Africa less important in other regions? These are examples of like more short-term concrete goals that we've been working towards. So that's one thing, just agreeing on one common goal. Then you have to make your argument convincing and attractive to who you're trying to sell it to. So policy and data is important. I was hearing a couple of numbers that people were mentioning that of the growing importance of the Canadian African diaspora. We know that the numbers are growing, but are there data on like specific contributions to specific economic areas, like about health workers? What about culture? What about other areas where we could show what are concretely the contributions to Canada's economy, and also why Canadian Africans matter politically to people who vote? In which ridings are there the biggest communities and so forth? So I think making sure that you make an argument to someone that is important to them, that matters to them, and again, politicians and decision makers will know if you go to an MP and you say, oh, actually, the Somali population of your riding is that number of people, and if you want to win your election, it will be important to have them on your side. These things actually work. And then the third one is to really spread the message clearly, really everywhere. Government relations is an important part, but again, the communities that are represented in this room and go much beyond across the countries, again, live in different ridings. Everyone has an MP that people can talk to. Is it possible to mobilize people once there is a common message around encouraging people to call their MPs, to write to them, to visit them? And actually, these things actually matter. And if across the country, many MPs get visited by many people saying the same thing, it's going to start to matter. And not being afraid of being visible, and not being afraid of having doing a little bit of marketing. So for example, I'm wearing a one t-shirt here, the logo, and I actually hate logos and I hate being branded in my personal life, but I make an effort of wearing that shirt because people can recognize us, they can recognize me, my colleagues, they see our products or people, and they see, okay, I'm connecting the dots between what these people are saying here and these people are saying here because we have that common logo. So, some marketing, I think, always goes a long way in terms of advocacy. And just going back to GR and not being afraid to to call yourself lobbyists either, like, you know, being a lobbyist is kind of a dirty word, but really there's lobbyists across all sorts of things, like all the major industries in Canada have lobbyists, many communities of different immigrant communities have lobbyists, and I'm asking a question, this will be a naive question, I don't know how many Canadian African organization are registered lobbyists. I'd be really interested in that. So, and then get the media interested. So I think there's a lot that can be done. Of course, not for me to decide what sort of organization should exist. I know a lot of people have been thinking and talking about it, but the diaspora has a powerful voice, and I think it could be even louder for sure.
Thank you.
Don't mind having me stand? Yeah. Okay. Okay, sure. Excellency, Monsieur le Président, ladies and gentlemen, vous permettez, je vais parler en français. Il m'a été demandé d'aborder la question de la contribution en matière d'investissement. Alors, pour répondre à cette question, nous devons d'abord mettre en évidence les différentes facettes de la richesse de la diaspora. Premier élément, premier capital, c'est le capital financier. Transfert de la diaspora vis-à-vis de l'Afrique, seulement en 2023, il y a eu plus de 53 milliards de dollars transférés en Afrique subsaharienne uniquement. Au cours du temps, à travers le temps, les transferts financiers de la diaspora est devenu le premier bailleur de fonds de l'Afrique. Si on prend l'aide publique au développement et les investissements directs réunis, le transfert financier dépasse tout cela. Deuxième capital, capital intellectuel et technique. Troisièmement, c'est le capital politique, contribution au lieu pour la démocratie et tout ça. Quatrièmement, capital culturel et en cinquième lieu, le capital social. En fait, la diaspora procure des transferts, des avantages à trois catégories de personnes. Premièrement, les pays d'accueil. Au Canada, par exemple, apport en matière de main-d'œuvre, contribution à la croissance économique. Deuxièmement, élargissement des marchés et meilleure compréhension de la culture et des préoccupations des Africains. À la diaspora elle-même, c'est une opportunité d'élargir les possibilités de carrière et de contribuer à leur propre épanouissement personnel. Au pays d'origine, ça une grande possibilité d'accès au conseil technique, meilleur rapprochement de la diaspora, par exemple. Alors, toute cette influence ira en grandissant avec le temps. Cependant, tout cela ne serait que des deux pieds si nous ne passons pas à l'action. Pour le grand auteur Thomas Edgley, le grand but de la vie, ce n'est pas la connaissance, c'est l'action. C'est dans cet esprit que nous avons créé Force Leadership Africain. En tant qu'organisation de la diaspora, pour se concerter, mais aussi pour passer à l'action. Nous avons, entre autres, deux objectifs fondamentaux. Premièrement, promouvoir les leadership et l'entrepreneuriat. Et le deuxième, c'est de contribuer à la mise en œuvre d'un partenariat mutuellement profitable entre le Canada et l'Afrique. Et pour être efficace, nous avons créé différentes cellules d'action à travers notre structure opérationnelle qui s'appelle le Centre de référence professionnelle de conseil et de transfert de technologie, avec différents modules, commerce et investissement, affaires technologiques, soutien à l'entrepreneuriat, etc. Nous répondons ainsi aux attentes à la fois de l'Union africaine qui considère que nous sommes la 6e région du monde, de l'Afrique par exemple dans le monde. Nous répondons aux attentes de la diaspora elle-même et aux pays d'origine. Au cours de nos forums, chaque année, nous organisons au mois de mai un forum Canada-Afrique sur l'investissement. Certains ont eu des plaquettes sur ce que nous avons fait. Et qu'est-ce que nous faisons pendant ce forum? Nous mettons les officiels et les gens d'affaires en contact
pour des possibilités d'affaires. Alors, maintenant pour le Canada, quelles sont les opportunités économiques que représente l'Afrique? D'abord, les ressources naturelles, je ne vais pas rémunérer parce que ça a été déjà rémunéré. Le deuxième élément, c'est que le continent africain constitue un marché jeune en croissance. 1,4 milliard d'habitants avec plus de 60% ayant moins de 25 ans et une population qui a tendance à doubler tous les 25 ans. Selon le Forum économique mondial, en 2030, plus de 40% des Africains vont être dans la partie supérieure de la croissance, ce qui devient un marché de 2,500 milliards de dollars de marché dans différents secteurs, immobilier, alimentation agro-industrie, commerce de l'État, le numérique, et etc. Alors maintenant, tout cela a quand même comporte des défis et des perspectives. La première chose à mentionner, c'est que malgré tout ce que l'on dit, malgré la bonne volonté, le volume du marché entre le Canada et l'Afrique, c'est seulement 1% du total. 1%. Deuxième élément. Les gens d'affaires africains qui voyagent un peu partout, aux États-Unis, dans les pays européens, lorsqu'ils veulent venir au Canada, ils n'ont pas de visa. Je vais vous donner seulement en 2024, cette année, nous avons fait un forum à Montréal. Sur les 123 personnes inscrites, 95% n'ont pas eu de visa et ils ne sont pas venus. Je ne dis pas 10, 95% n'ont pas eu de visa. Nous sommes là pour nous dire la vérité. Troisième vérité fondamentale, les institutions qui sont là pour développer, supporter le commerce avec l'Afrique, que ce soit EDC, Findel Canada, Corporation commerciale Canada. Ils sont outillés, mais il manque de financement lorsqu'il s'agit, par exemple, de financer les études de faisabilité, qui sont des choses importantes en matière d'investissement. Et les banques privées canadiennes ne veulent pas faire le business avec l'Afrique. Pendant ce temps, que ce soit les banques américaines ou les banques européennes et la Chine, ils sont là en train de supporter leurs emplois. Autre élément, un autre chiffre. Le Canada a mis en place un capital de 2,3 milliards de dollars pour la zone Indo-Pacifique. Pour l'Afrique, 0 $. Comment pouvons-nous financer le développement des relations d'affaires avec l'Afrique? Donc, il faut sortir uniquement du vouloir pour aller vers l'action. C'est pour cela que nous recommandons la constitution d'un fonds d'investissement canadien pour l'Afrique avec un capital minimum de 1 milliard de dollars pour faire le développement avec l'Afrique. Et nous recommandons également le renforcement des liens entre le gouvernement canadien et ses institutions avec la diaspora et leur donner les moyens, leur donner des contrats réels pour réaliser des projets et financer leurs activités lorsqu'il s'agit par exemple de financer le Forum d'affaires Canada-Afrique. Et au plan global, toutes les parties du monde font. On m'a dit 10 minutes. I have 3 minutes. C'est très important ce que je suis en train de dire. Alors, donc, au plan global, les États-Unis, la Chine, tout le monde fait un sommet avec l'Afrique, sauf le Canada. Il faudrait organiser dans les prochains jours un forum Canada-Afrique gouverné avec le gouvernement canadien lui-même. Et avant de conclure, je nous invite, nous les membres de la diaspora, à parler moins et à agir davantage, comme de vrais citoyens canadiens. Des vrais citoyens canadiens parce qu'on parle de commerce, ce n'est pas seulement de dire. Nous avons deux rôles à jouer. Des bons guides concrets, mais aussi des partenaires qui font des co-entreprises tant avec les Canadiens qu'avec les Africains. Et pour terminer, je vous invite à notre prochaine activité qui aura lieu au mois de mai de l'année prochaine. la prochaine édition, 7e édition du Forum d'affaires Canada-Afrique sur le commerce et l'investissement qui aura lieu à Montréal. Je vous remercie.
Thank you very much. So now we move on to Germaine. Okay, all right. So then it's that's a lot. Can I go there? Yes. Please. I don't want to say
Good afternoon. I think we are almost about to sleep, so we should wake up a little. That's right. Yeah. I'll try to be brief, although I have been told to be short on my discussions. I came from another conference last night, actually. I arrived last night, and 2 hours later, Dr. Magura was briefing me on this conference. It's not about to come here, but I have to come here to join you. Thank you very much. It's a great conference, this one, where we're discussing the impact of the African diaspora, not only here in Canada, but also in the African continent. The impact of the African diaspora on both Canada and Africa is an important matter, which requires a deep study and more thoughtful review. It cannot be covered in a couple of hours or 10 minutes. The impact of the Canadian diaspora on the African continent and on Canada is indeed a very wide subject. Because of time limitations, I will only briefly touch on a few matters that may be of interest to both the diaspora and the Canadian authorities and businesses who may wish to work in Africa. Friends, Africa, as you know, is a very large continent, both in area and in population. What does that mean? It has implications, of course. It enjoys, of course, many opportunities. And of course, it has challenges. I know, as a veteran banker, that most international investors overemphasize the risks of the continent. Every opportunity anywhere has a risk, but they do overemphasize the risks on Africa. High risks are always associated with high returns. That's what we should keep in mind. If the risk is higher, the returns will be, and the returns will also be higher. Where there is higher risk, the returns are often high and rewarding. It all depends on the awareness of the players and investors. As noted, Africa's opportunities include a young and growing population that present themselves as a big market of consumers on the one hand, but also as an energetic and productive young workforce with many years working life ahead of them. I know the risks are overplayed and adept investors take advantage of opportunities with little or no competition. You know who's doing that today in Africa? China is doing that. India is doing that. South Korea is doing that. Japan is doing that. What is Canada doing there? Very little. I hope that Canadian businesses do not wait long for the right moment, which may never come, and hence lose the many opportunities available today. Africa is one of the most profitable continents for foreign direct investments. Africa's economic growth is also generally reported to be on the high side. Countries such as Kenya, the Democratic Republic of Congo, Tanzania, Cote d'Ivoire, and Djibouti, and others are some of those African countries that enjoy fast-growing economies and provide high returns for investments. Even Somalia, my broken country, is recovering, and there is plenty of construction business going on there. The resources, its resources include its geostrategic location and its large maritime space, which offer plenty of business opportunities. Infrastructure, telecommunications, technologies, banking and finance, and of course, mining for precious minerals, including oil and gas, gold, rare earths, lithium, cobalt, and others are some of the most promising sectors in that continent. The COVID-19 pandemic may have slowed down such growth as it did in many other parts of the world. But beyond the global pandemic, Africa's future looks bright. Recovery from the pandemic is already evident in the decreasing growth of the African economies towards normalcy. Africa's natural resources in terms of minerals, agriculture, rural livestock, fishing prospects, oil and natural gas, solar energy, wind, and other renewable energies are all great attractions for any investor. Yet France, despite being the second largest continent in the world, both in area and population, the size of trade between Canada and Africa is not as large as with other continents. In 2022, the top 3 Canada export destinations to Africa were Algeria, Morocco, and Nigeria, which registered only a volume of some Canadian dollar $2.5 billion, compared to imports from 3 top African exporters of Canadian dollars 5.3 billion, coming from South Africa, Nigeria, and Egypt. According to a recent report of Canada-African Trade Relations in July 23 for the corporation called Templar. By comparison, the total export value of goods from Canada to the top 3 Asian countries was Canadian dollar 55.3 billion, compared to 2.5 with Africa during the same year of 22. According to the same report, the report also highlighted that the volume of trade to top European destinations of some 3 countries, of $32.5 billion. I will not finish that. I will continue if you don't mind. With Latin America, with Latin America, the 3 top Canada export destinations registered some $6 billion. While imports from 3 top Latin American exports to Canada amount to $14.9 billion. Canada's top exports to Africa in general consist of wheat, non-metallic minerals, mining, and iron mining. Most imports are oil and gas. It's an indication that there is plenty of room to do with Africa. So we have to work on that. When I first came to Canada, some decades ago, I made a study of Canada's trade statistics. And I noticed that over 80% of Canada's trade relations were with our neighbors in the South. Nothing had changed back since then. And that was 3 decades ago, still the same. So there's space for Canada exports to diversify and expand to other countries, and particularly the African continent. Excellencies, how does the African diaspora in Canada, our adopted country, help linking Canada to Africa, and what do they actually need to do? What have they achieved so far? And can this be improved? That's what we have to ask ourselves all the time. The African diaspora population in Canada is not small. As of 2021, the diaspora was said to be about 1.4 million. It's still a large population. In the years since, the number must have increased. according to Senator Gerba of Quebec. Yes. 1 minute. I will have to bypass some of the information I want to give you because that's the important thing. It is some facts that we should all know. If you do not know the facts, we cannot take proper decisions. You have to have proper information, be able to reach good decisions. But there are facts about Africa, and that's what we should also always know. Africa is home to many resources of rich and resource-rich natural habitats, including oceans, coasts, forests, highlands, deserts, and oceans, and more. African countries are waking up to their wealth, basically, that they sit on, and hence everybody is vying to those resources, but they are actually working to keep their resources. Yes, Africa has 30%. I will finish. 30% of the remaining mineral resources in the world is in Africa. That's what you should keep in mind. Africa has 30% of the world's mineral resources. It's an important number. Probably there are also minerals we haven't discovered in the desert continent, and in the jungles of the continent, and in the oceans of the continent. I would like to conclude this presentation as follows. Africa is too large and too wealthy to be ignored. We cannot ignore it. We're Canadians at the end of the day, we have to remember this. We should not ignore the African continent where we come from.
Yeah, I think.
Advisory, I would say we should create an advisory committee at the Global Affairs Africa to deal with the continent. We have to give them, I will go away.
Yes, I think
Canada should partner with Africa. It still has a goodwill in the continent. The Africans still like Canada. We should remember that.
Thank you very much to our presenters. So one common thing that we want through all the presenters that we've heard from is that this is the time for Canada to reconsider strongly its relationship with the African continent because of the many opportunities that the continent presents. But also the fact that it is just right that Canada even does that because it is part of the international community. From the presentation by Susan, one thing that key thing that I picked up here is the need for knowledge and skill transfer, which you mentioned very strongly, and elaborated on it. Elise, gave us some ideas about how to advocate, to engage in advocacy, especially having a common goal. And Dr. Bouka spoke in French, language that I'm very, very deficient. And I know him very well that he spoke passionately. Yeah. And Dr. What had also, considered the theme of the need for Canada to diversify its trade to include the African continent. But one thing that you mentioned, which is very, very strong, is the fact that the right moment will never come, and that the moment is now for Canada to do more with Africa. Please, we have about 10 minutes for questions, and I would like to begin. I see 4, 5 hands here, so please we'll start.
Before Leslie Nelson went to Geneva, was the top civil servant for the place. And I asked her a simple question: does Canada really understand Africa? She knew she would not like to read it. But I tell you the truth. No. That's still. So my question is, how come one country like Canada, 42 million, is addressing Africa, 54 countries, as if it's a political entity? Africa is not. And Africa has 1.37 billion inhabitants and Canada has 4. So I would like to ask, how can we possibly trim our expectations? How can we possibly get the facts right? And for Canada to deal with Africa as a continent. Thank you.
And then we are going to take about 3 questions, and then I will allow the panelists to respond. So please, there is a gentleman at the back.
Well, thank you so much. My name is Osman, and I have a passion for public policy international affairs. I have 2 questions, if I may. The first question is, many in African diaspora here in Canada, they possess the knowledge, the experience, and the commitment to their countries of origin, yet they face barriers being included in decision-making process. So my question is for GAC specifically, and any representation from GAC here. What concrete steps are being taken to ensure that the diaspora can actively contribute to shaping policy and trade strategies between Canada and Africa? We hear a lot of promises of change, but many feel, hopeless right now. How can GAC rebuild the trust and move beyond just the rhetoric? That's my first question. The second one is about Africa and the UN. With the news that being viral right now, that Africa will be given 2 permanent seats at the UN without veto power. Many feel this is unjust. And I would like to know that how Canada can support diplomatically or strategically in reserving the right for the African people to have 2 seats with a veto power. You cannot just invite someone to the table and ask them to be muted. So I just wanted to know what concrete step that Canada will take. All right. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Merci.
All right, and I can please pass on the mic to Elise.
Hi, my name is Toby Ogodwin, and by day I serve the Canadian Public Service as a competition analyst, fighting inequality of market access and excessive market power of powerful firms in Canada for the benefit of Canadians. And at night, I direct Economy Africa, and it really is an initiative to build relationships with agencies in trade, competition, and artificial intelligence in Africa. So I started this initiative, Economy Africa, 2 years ago, and just to build relationships. And I'll be a storyteller like Susan. Africans love relationships because it's the basis of how we express trust. And in having these policy conversations with agencies, I've spoken to directors from competition agencies in Zambia, Botswana, Nigeria, Mauritius, South Africa. And 2 things always stand out. There's the desire for collaboration with Canada and with the West. And there's also the desire for knowledge transfer from these conversations I've had. So I'll just touch on the desire for collaboration, because that's really the key of my question.
Yes, please, if you can.
So I'll straight to the point.
Yes.
So I know that many seated in this room might be working for government agencies in Canada. And I work for one, the Competition Bureau, and we had a competition summit last month. And there was a panel at this summit titled it was one of the international panels. And there was not a single African competition agency represented. And just to go back to the theme of this panel, which is what can the Canadian African diaspora bring to the table in terms of trade, policy making. What we bring as Africans and also I'm a Canadian is we notice there's omissions of opportunities to build relationships with agencies that are necessary for trade facilitation. So I'm sitting there, there's an international panel with representatives from the US, from Mexico, from Europe, and not a single African agency.
Yes.
So I guess the question, or maybe it's a general observation, that for us to facilitate trust, which is the basis of any long-term relationship, Canada needs to really stop, missing out on the opportunities to invite those that matter to the table on trade conversations. Thank you.
All right. Okay, so please, I'll allow the panelists to respond to those questions. So there was a question about Canada being a state and dealing with the geographical region. There's a question relating to Quebec. And I think those questions that was asked by that gentleman, I can see that the Deputy Minister is here and that her special remarks is going to, I guess, look at some of these issues. So maybe you leave those questions and respond to the other questions. Thank you.
No, I have a comment, if you want to allow me.
Sure.
Generally, when we are talking about these things, we go to the romantic problem, the romantic behavior. When there are people are talking about business, it is to exchange things. We can't ask God to organize our community to make business. Go to Abidjan, go to Kinshasa or everywhere. Who is taking care of our economy? Lebanese or other people? We are making in Africa. We are making the national, the continental sport. What is the continental sport? It's politics. This is what we are doing in Africa. Every day. If business, here, God is not making the business. God is just organizing how to make it. It is the business organization, company. It is why I say, in our community, we have to learn how to make business. It is not to talk. We have to have our companies to deal with Canadian companies. This is the global continent of countries. It is an exchange of products and services. And the people who do that are business people. This is my short comment on this.
I want to take the first question about 44 million and 1.4. The answer is in this room. We have the diaspora. In this room, every single person is an ambassador from somewhere on the continent. That if we organize these ambassadors in here, 44 million is already represented in every corner of that 1.4 billion. The diaspora is the answer to that question.
The diaspora is not a homogeneous body. The diaspora is fragmented as all this discussion. There is nothing called diaspora and we are not a political party.
Yes, sir. And the answer to that is in the organization of this diaspora. If there is a company that is ready to do business with Africa and you cannot find enough TCS support on the continent, we don't have to all be, there's no, Europe is not a homogeneous. No, the whole world is not homogeneous, right? So Africa cannot. In my own country of Uganda, we have languages that I cannot speak. But does that mean that anybody who wants to do business in Uganda has to find one homogeneous African or Ugandan or association to do it? No. There are business leaders, business networks from Africa in Canada that can work with the Canadian businesses. If we only, the government's role in this is to make enabling policies so that this business can happen. My brother is right, the government cannot do it. The government leads by example and says Africa is important. And because the government puts the weight behind that and supports the Canadian businesses, they can go to Africa. Without that, the Africans cannot do business.
Is anyone else who would like to?
I just want to add one point. If you don't want to work, nobody's going to work for you. You want to produce, nobody's going to produce for you. Africa needs to work hard. They're working very hard. Maybe they are at a second stage at the moment, but it is Canada who needs Africa to work on Africa and take advantage of the opportunities that are there today.
Thank you. Okay, so we take the next round of questions. So I see the microphone is already there, and I can see another hand up here, please. Yes, please.
Yes, good afternoon, everybody. I'm a member of the Secretariat of the African Study Group.
The microphone is
on.
Oh, yes.
It's on.
It's on?
It's on.
It's on.
It's on.
It's on. Yes.
Thank you. I'm a member of the Africa Study Group of the Secretariat. I think we're having an underlying question here, and I see your conversation here. And I would like to jump in. In ecology, there's a concept they call maximal variability, which means you cannot consider ecology the same way around the world. You consider ecology from different climates, from different environment. And I would like to suggest that for Africa. Africa is 55 countries. We cannot treat them the same. They have different objectives, they have different challenges, they have different goals. So in my perspective, we can look into considering Africa along their needs, their objectives, and their challenges. And they really exist. But that doesn't mean we cannot go and develop more, fruitful relationships. If you have a country like Canada or France or China or Russia organizing those big conferences, in my perspective, it leads nowhere, because they've been putting together all different perspectives, and they get out of there with very, great recommendations and everything that no one follows, like what's happening on different international stage organizations. So if I may, I would suggest that we consider Africa along the lines of the maximum variability. We can see different challenges from different parts of Africa and have or establish relationships along those lines instead of considering Africa, 55 countries, 1 billion people as the same. We are not. And whoever consider that true, I think we may go back and go back to your country and look into what's happening there. The other thing is, we have but how can I put this? In the US, after George Floyd, people came up with the word wokeism. Everyone is supposed to be woke. What I'm suggesting is for developed countries to be woke, not Africans. They're already awake. All those different developed countries should be aware on looking the way they're talking about Africa, the way they're approaching Africa. Because what we would prevent is what happened previously with Asia. We saw a lot of delegations spending a lot of money going to Asia, but they could have done it in the beginning. That's what I'm suggesting. Start working in Africa today. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
My name is Tuesday.
Yes,
excuse me.
Before you go on. Yes, before you go on, may I say that we are a little bit behind time here. So if you have the microphone, please go straight to ask your question.
Thank you. We should use the African time. I think from the first speaker, I think we should acknowledge the problem of Africa is created by the Western countries and specifically the P5s at the UN. Number two, we do have African diaspora in Canada was established in 2008 for history. specifically to address all those issues that we're talking about. It's supposed to be the policy game to advise the parliamentarians, the foreign minister, the businesses, and so forth. But unfortunately, it dies. Now, we have African parliamentarians, MPs. Where are they here? They are not here. They are supposed to be the guys to influence the policy of Canada for the interest of Africa. Example, 1997, we have a group of responsible refugees.
I think I made it quite clear. I just want to moderate this so we are mindful of people's time. Please go ahead and ask your question, please. Okay. Ambassador, please, you have the floor.
My name is Sowa. I'm the High Commissioner of Ghana. I just have a few comments. I think the way the discussions have gone, clearly indicates something to me. Canada is interested in Africa. Question: what are the African diaspora in Canada doing to enhance this relationship? I expect the Canadian African diaspora to organize themselves and to start doing business with their fellows in Africa. I expect them to engage with the financial institutions in Canada and encourage them to reach out to Africa. Of course, I expect Global Affairs to look at the cap that they have on businesses from Canada going to Africa, because there's a cap of about $5 million, which is not helpful. We've got to get rid of that and focus on business for business sake. And, I think the initiative to come out with a strategy is a good one. But the question I will always ask is 54 countries, strategy. Canada knows Africa. Canada has dealt with Africa for so long. We don't need a strategy. We just need to do business with Canada. That is what we're asking. We just want the doors to open to do business with Canada. Thank you.
All right, at this point, I think I'm going to take one more question. Yeah. And that question is going to come from online, and then this session is over, please. We are already, so. Okay, I think we are.
Yep. Can you hear me? Can you hear me?
Sure. Okay, we can hear you.
Yes, thank you very much. I really appreciate the opportunity, and I believe the conference is an opening doors for diaspora to contribute even more to the relationship between Canada and Africa. My question is basically, the first one focuses on identifying the strategy of formal inclusion of diaspora members in policy making. And although I send it to the moderator, the question would be like, how can Canada or the Canadian government better engagement of the African Canadian diaspora in shaping trade policy with African nations, given the fact that its role and it's bringing itself in the stage to be a power that could definitely benefit Africans. And since Africa also, as we can see, I would say it's been a hot continent where conflicts are there. I would say that as Canada aims to strengthen its global presence in there, how does the Canadian government envision its role in mediating peace, especially in conflict areas in Africa? And how can Canada leverage its diplomatic channels to support sustainable peace and conflict resolution, while basically, I would say, fostering mutual economic growth that can benefit both Canadian and African altogether, and bring diaspora or Canadian Africans in the middle of it to basically be a good opportunity for the Canadian government and the African countries as well. These are my questions. Thank you for giving me the opportunity.
Right, yes. So thank you very much for asking those questions. I will now hand over to the panel. So please.
And the government representatives are not here. We better focus on what we have to do. Focus to be organized, as Excellency just said, ourselves, individually or in company, to say, yes, we are here to make business with Canadians. And to ask our colleagues in Africa who are business people to connect with us within company, both companies, or to make this good in them. And the Canadian government will follow us, will support us to the government. We need a $1 billion Canadian fund to support Africa, because the Canadian banking are afraid to make business with Africa. So when the government will begin to make this fund, the Canadian private banks will come to follow the system to support the business. The main thing for me is what ourselves are going to do in this discussion. We are not going to say, government do it for us. No, we have to take the place. This is how the other community are organized. This is my point of view.
The world is changing. We cannot be talking in terms of like the old ways. These are gone. Africa is different from the Africa of yesterday. It's young, educated, and its businesses are supposed to be coming to this part of the world to market their products, what they have. The African diaspora, like us, can only actually, facilitate things, because business is done by business people. And so governments actually deal with governments. So we should be thinking in terms of, if you know businesses in Africa, in your countries, you should be asking them to come here to market what they are selling, or what they can import from here, or what kind of products they have. They should market their products. Canada, if you want to talk to the government, between governments, we can also facilitate between these two. So we should not be thinking in terms of what Canada can do for Africa. It is a relationship which should be based on what the Africa wants and how they want to do things. And we should forget that whole theory where there's a donor to provide some kind of aid to Africa. It's no longer possible. That has changed. And the African diaspora that has gone to Asia, the ones that have gone to South Korea, to China, to Indonesia, to Malaysia, they make more money than the Africans who have come to the West, basically, because they still think in terms of the old ways. That's gone. We should change ourselves.
Yeah.
Thank you very much to the panelists, and thank you very much to everyone of you who asked questions or made a comment. Now, this session has come to a close, and we have about 10 minutes break, and I will now hand over to Dr. Bangura.
Thank you so much, Dr. Bouka. Before concluding the session, there have been many questions, and I believe that we might be able to find answers to those questions without taking time. So be patient. But before concluding this, I am one of the Diaspora. The African Study Group is not a Diaspora group. But please, Father, keep this in mind. We should stop complaining. We should do something. We let's come together. The ambassador is saying, many people say, we should stop complaining. We should do something. We have such a potential. We organize this session so that we discuss how to do it. So we will have a second panel now. I have the courage to say anything because I am one of the guys. With 20 years of experience of the United States, I think I have the liberty to tell you, brother, wake up. And as I said again, we should stop complaining. We should do something. If we don't do it, nobody will come and do it for us. Yeah. Okay. Please. We have 5 minutes. Division of the study of the African, Canadian African Diaspora. Professor Tieku, the floor is yours and your panel is ready, sir.
Thank you so much, Sheikh, for first of all inviting me, and I thank the Africa Study Group for inviting me to join this exciting and interesting discussion. I'm wondering if it will be possible for me to see the room so that I can see the panelists. Okay, whilst we are dealing with the technical issue, I just want to say that the second panel is going to look at how, and this is a very important question, how can we as a diaspora strengthen our contribution to Canada's economic and foreign policy with African countries? And this question is very important because it's asking us not what Canada can do for us or African countries can do for us, but what as a diaspora group we can do to strengthen that particular relationship. And I think it's a very important for us. There's always a tendency for us to, or for people to ask what others can do for them rather than what they can do for their countries. So it's very important that we discuss this. And I'm also heartened by the kind of conversation that we had in the first panel, and in particular the concluding remarks that we should not use this opportunity as a time to complain, right? This is the first time that we are coming together in this particular way, and it will be very important to use it to put on the table concrete, actionable solution that will strengthen our relationship with the Canadian state, our relationship with the African state, and how we can contribute to making the relationship much more stronger. So, and I'm joined by an all-star panel, Professor Akuffo, Templar Kalundu, and then Susan Namulenwa. You've heard from Susan. But before I turn to them, and we're going to go according to the order of the program. So Professor Akuffo will speak first, then I'll move on to Templar, and then later on to Susan. So that's the way we're going to. I also want, since I'm online, and I'm sorry that I couldn't join you in person. It's a flu season. Unfortunately, I've succumbed to the challenges of the season. And so I'm hoping that my voice I will cooperate throughout the period. But I'm so glad that we get a chance to be able to do this. So this is the order that we're going to go. But before I go and then invite Professor Akuffo to make the remarks, I'm going to give them all of them 5 minutes because I want this to be a much more interactive kind of section and give opportunity to the brain power in this particular room as well as online to be able to contribute. On that note, I would encourage those online, for example, if you can put your questions in the chat, and then the moderator or those managing it will be able to sample it and will be able to call on you to contribute to this particular discussion. But before I move to Professor Akuffo, I was asked just to touch a little bit on how, as an individual, we can contribute to strengthen that particular relationship. The first point I'm going to make, there's no point that I'm going to make here that isn't familiar to many of you in this particular room, very experienced people in the room. So I'm just going to highlight some of your strengths, but I will put one concrete thing on the table for us to discuss. And before I do that, I know very well that it is not my place to be making recommendations and suggestions, but I will take the opportunity here to say that this is a wonderful forum, and as part of our attempt to strengthen as a diaspora group, we should try and do this on a regular basis, not just only one time kind of an event, but rather we make it something of a regular interaction between ourselves, and this time around with the foreign policy and Canadian policy establishment. So in terms of an individual, what can we do? And the first thing that we have to realize in Canada is that we have a lot of agency, and I'll try my possible best to operate within the 5 minutes because I'm going to give everyone 5 minutes. So we have a lot of agency, and the good news about us is as diasporans, we are very highly educated and skilled, and therefore it's up to us to be able to take advantage to make the change that we want. No one would do it for us unless we do it. Everywhere, the diaspora groups that are organized are the ones that the political system will listen to them. If you're not organized, and if you don't push, no one is going to hand it over to you on a silver platter. It's not done anywhere. So the political system is always biased in favor of those groups that are organized. We are diverse, and we should be. And that does not stop us from organizing. That does not stop us from making the difference that we want to make. If you want to make a difference in terms of the Canadian and then the African political system, there are some few things that you need to bear in mind. Number one is that you have to pay so much attention to both the Canadian and African political institutions, both at the formal level. This, I think, sometimes, it's an obvious point. At the formal level, we should learn about the processes, right? And the processes and the document and as well as the lobbying skills that we need, or lobbying tactics that we need to be able to make a difference. That's an obvious point that I want to. But the other point I want to add is that we should recognize that although we are dealing with formal processes, it's very important for us to invest in the informal processes. And that is the point that I think at one point I want to put on the table. We tend to ignore it. These are human institutions. The more we invest in that, building that human relationship, the more we build that trust among them, the better will be our opportunity to be able to make meaningful change when it comes to making foreign policy contribution. The second thing that I also put on the table is that as a diaspora, you have to be a super networker, right? Network not just only with the powers that be, but also sometimes network with those behind those the powers that be. It's easy always for us to try to network with the politicians, right? But sometimes the speech writers, right? The staff behind them are the ones that we want to spend some time, quality time, to get to know them, to make sure that we talk to them, right? It's good to know the politicians, but it's even better if you know their staff, chief of staffs, and the staff around them, I think is always very, very important. And if you are going there to do it, you have to be a people's person, right? So you have to be one of those individuals, even if you are not the most sociable individuals, you have to turn on the social skills to be able to navigate your way around it. But there's one complexity that I wanted to put on the table for all of us to think about, and that will be the message that perhaps I will leave with you, which is that the complexity lies in the fact that we are dealing with an institutions where or relationship that can be very transient. And what do I mean by can be very transient? What I mean is that both individuals who are working within a foreign policy establishment, both on the African continent as well as here, they tend to move so quickly. So, and this is where you come in here. If you are going to make a difference, you should be flexible enough and adaptable to continually, that's the language I'm going to, continually build new relationship whilst maintaining the old ones. So you may build relationship with someone in the bureaucratic structure and you think you have that reliable partner there. Often they don't stay there for that long. It takes them usually 3 years, they're gone, right? So you should be able to do it. It can be very frustrating. You cannot allow that frustration to get into you. You have to go there with a mindset, with the ability to adapt to the changes and the flexibility within. Same here with the politicians, right? So in most cases, you find political priorities will change. There's likely going to be elections and people move on. And in terms of even the way the bureaucracy, the political system operates, sometimes can also change. You should have the mindset to be able to adapt to these particular, and that's what I think I'm going to leave you with. With this opening remarks, let me invite Professor Akuffo. Professor Akuffo, I'm not going to spend time to introduce him because he has already introduced himself. But the one thing I wanted to put, for those of you who are not aware over here, is that he is the first person that I know to write a first book on Canada-Africa's relationship. That's a very good, really good book, really systematizing the relationship between Canada and Africa when it comes to a foreign policy. So he is very knowledgeable, and I'm so proud and glad to welcome him to the podium. So, Dr. Akuffo, you have the floor. 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Professor Tieku. I really appreciate the very kind words. Yes, I gave my panelists 7 minutes, and now I'm being asked to do it in 5 minutes. But I will do my best and do it in 5 minutes. So let me first of all, thank Dr. Bangura for organizing and the Secretary of Africa Technical Board and it's an important event. I really appreciate that. And the very first panel discussions, they're called the remarks by Minister Parliamentary Secretary Oliphant and also by Professor Tettey, really points clearly about the need for us to really think about the Canada-Africa relationship more seriously and more systematically. I have my opening remarks was going to be about 10 minutes. So now I have to, abandon my notes and just speak for 5 minutes. Now I have 4 minutes. Okay, sure. I think change takes time. Change is important, but it also takes time. And I want to begin my substantive comments from 2002 Canada Space June 8 Summit. Something very important happened there under Prime Minister Carleton, when he led the June 8 for the very first time to come up with a clear blueprint there, Africa Action Plan. Canada itself established the Canada Fund for Africa and the Canada Investment Fund for Africa. These were blueprints that really shaped the relationship with the African continent going forward. Now fast forward to 20 years later, and here we are with challenges with Canada-Africa relationship. And I must say that in spite of all these challenges, one thing that is very true is that Canada has remained on the African continent, and it has remained committed to the things that it is doing, just that we have not put enough resources and energy into those things. Now, the principle of partnership was actually voted by the African Union. In 2001, it introduced what is called a new partnership for African development. But that was a way for the African continent to change the narrative about development and relationship with the Western world or the global community. In fact, the principles of partnership, and here I'm just going to list them without explaining them. It calls for equality, calls for transparency, responsibility, complementarity, and result-oriented. I think result-oriented, here means that there needs to be clearly outlined goals that are based on the capabilities of the partners involved and pushing this to this for conclusion. Now, we can identify, it's very important that when we talk about Canadian foreign policy, yes, it's about Canada, but there are drivers of foreign policy. There are things that the Canadian government has to take into consideration in formulating its own engagement with the African continent. But you have to look at its interdependence, not only with the African continent, but also with its allies, for example. What is the multilateral obligations that Canada has? And what is its sense of global community and the forces of globalization, how all these shape Canada's relationship. In fact, in the midst of pushing this idea of partnership with the African with Africa, particularly with the African Union and regional economic communities at the time under Britain, they identified at least 5 important areas of engagement. One was on peacekeeping trade. 2, on international justice and human rights. 3 was on ethical rules related to trade. And here specifically, Canada led efforts to pass what is called the Kimberley Process Certification Scheme on conflict diamonds. The 4th one was governance, where we find more broadly to include activities of civil society organizations. And lastly, to promote trade and investment, something that the Canadian government set a fund, the Canada Investment Fund, for Africa to help to champion that cause. Now, over time, of course, what has been the missing link in all this is the role of the Canadian African diaspora. In fact, the diaspora community, as Professor Tieku highlighted, in any in terms of making foreign policy, governments will listen to groups that are organized, that have coherent ideas, that have clear policies or goals that they would like to bring to the table. And I think this event is important to help us to chart that path. So what or how can the African diaspora, Canadian African diaspora, make a difference in Canada's strategic relationship with the African continent going forward? I'm going to suggest 4 things, without also explaining them, and I'm very happy to talk about them during the question time. Number 1 is that there needs to be a conscious effort to build academic interest in the study of Canada-Africa relations. In fact, in the whole field of Canadian foreign policy, there are only three who actually study the relationship. But I have colleagues like Professor Tieku, whose work is relevant and core to that relationship, as well. But these work is not necessarily, studying the relationship in terms of, studying the relationship. Relationship is really at the core of foreign study of foreign policy. The second point is that we need to think strategically to support regional priorities and the alignment of Canadian interests with these regional priorities. The reason why I say this is that Africa is very diverse. In fact, it came up in the first panel that there are over 1.4 billion people on the continent, 55 independent states, various ethnic groups and all that. But the African Union has brought these 55 states together at the continental level. And at the regional level, there are regional economic communities. These are the centers of economic integration and political development, as well as with promoting security. And their activities and interests should drive us in moving forward. The third point has to do with public advocacy, and I'm glad that Elise pointed us to how we can do that. But this public advocacy must do at least two things. Number one, that it shouldn't be partisan. And number two is that it should cut across, ethnic lines. It shouldn't be driven by, ethnic, interest, but an African, interest. And lastly, there must be a Canadian Council for African Diaspora. For the Tieku, talk about, organizing the African diaspora. When there is a platform, when there is a unit, when there is an organization that really helps people to connect with the Canadian government, I think we can move forward well. And I would like to end with this food of thought. In fact, when you study Canadian foreign policy, as I said, Canada has been on the continent in spite of the fact that we have no resources clearly behind some of the things that needs to be done. But one thing that Canada has done well is its support for civil society organizations, Canadian and foreign civil society organizations that engage with the continent. But in doing so, we can see that Canada itself has not been visible on the continent. Because when we have CEDA carried the Canadian flag, it dealt directly with governments. And with civil society, they deal with civil society. And that is where that partnership or that relationship remained, and it has not really endured to the benefit of making Canada visible. So we need to clearly make effort to balance what the Canadian government is doing and what civil society is doing in order to make Canada more prominent and to help to build a stronger partnership. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. That was excellent. I think you've done wonderfully well. And the thing I like about it is the fact that you didn't use the podium to complain, and you kept to the promise that complaining is not a strategy. And the strategy is actually coming out with concrete suggestions. And I like the suggestions that you put on the table. Most of them are very actionable and concrete and can be implemented. Okay, the next I have is Templar.
Good afternoon. Can you hear me? You start my timer here. Or any issues?
Do we have Templar in the room?
Yes. I'm speaking. Can you hear me? Actually, you know what? I can talk about. I spent a minute on this. Thomas doesn't remember this, but he used to run my tutorial in undergrad, and he gave me a bad mark. All right, let's get to it. Thank you very much for having me here. I really appreciate this time. And honoring this opportunity to share my ideas and allowing me to be part of such a distinguished gathering. It means a lot to me. My name is Tieku. I am a businessman. This is a business person's perspective, right? I run a company called Preponderant, government, we do government relations, lobbying, investment relations, a bit more. I'm a managing director there. I'm also senior fellow at the Munk School of Business Public Policy. I'm there to support the school's initiatives, the researchers, the students, and with anything that's interesting that the Munk School does, because they're really cool. 2 years ago, my partner and I launched an organization called the Canadian Center for African Affairs Policy Research, which is a think tank focused on aggregation and publishing. We heard it in the earlier panel, we heard it earlier here. We need to publish more and more around this conversation, so we can make good decisions in public and private space regarding how to engage and work collectively on agreed upon goals. So I'm going to make this very, very quick, very brief. So consistency in advocacy, in gathering, and publishing. Consistency. You can build a consistency regardless of what sector you're working in, regardless of what you're trying to achieve. The more you do it, the better you get at it. The more awesome you get better at it, and the more they see you. Cohesion. You get more cohesion. That's probably the most difficult thing because of our diversity on the continent. But I think we're at that moment as a diaspora and as Africans in Africa, you can feel it. You can feel the cohesion. So let's do more on that. It will help us to work collectively and to find those things that connect us so that we can do more together. Intentionality. We need to solve whatever it is we're working on. We need solutions. It doesn't have to always be solutions, always solving, but we need to do things. We need actions, and we need to look back and say we did that regularly and more consistently. So intentionality. So whatever comes out of this conversation today, those two things, we need to solve them. By the time we meet next time, it's done. It's done. I'm not going to talk about it again. Or we know who's working on it right now, or we can point and say, hey, Mike, what did you do? He might not finish it, might start it. You can point at Mike. All right. Number two, we need a clear and coherent, agreed upon understanding of the reality we're doing business in. Let me explain. We understand that there's a narrative that's challenging some of the work that we're trying to accomplish when it comes to Canada liberation. It's an established narrative. Some may call it colonial this, some may call it this, some may call it that, but it's established. That's what we're doing business. And that should be what we work on, what brings us together, and what we're intentional about when it comes to solving certain challenges in that space. But also, what I really mean about what we do business. I think Madame Legault mentioned something interesting. She said, don't fear being a lobbyist. These narratives are presented on a daily basis by lobbying organizations that represent whether development organizations or they could be mining organizations or maybe other organizations. This is the environment that we're working with. This is a space that's dominated by these other lobbyists. So point them out, know what they're doing, educate yourself on what they're trying to accomplish, work with them or get rid of them. Support them or get rid of them. Either or make it an actionable decision. I don't mind collaborating with mining organizations. Africa's in the drill, Africa's in the mine. So we shouldn't be worried about working with our mining organizations here in Canada. They need to get on, we need to find a way to work with them because Africa's not going to get rid of it. Okay. I have a question to leave you. Collaboration is an investment. What are you willing to sacrifice? That's it.
Okay, thank you so much for that very succinct but beautiful ideas that you put on the table. And I think if there's one thing, take-home message that I have is this idea that collaboration is an investment in the way that you invest. With your money, you also have to invest in collaboration as well. And that's a very wonderful idea to put on the table. The last, certainly, but not the least, and I'm really looking forward to your presentation is Susan.
Thank you. So 5 minutes is the time I need to beat. Oh. I set my own timer, so because you are online, you can't catch me, but I'll be nice. So the question we are dealing with here is simple. I have I'm a scholar and I'm proud to say, when is the last time you were on the plane, on an airplane? And what is one thing that those people that help us in the plane, what is the one thing they always say? If at any one time the pressure drops and you need to put on a mask, the mask will fall down, they fall down those yellow lovely things, and they say, before you help anybody else, make sure your own mask is securely fastened. Right now, as I'm saying this, that statement is being done in thousands of languages over and over every time. What does that have to do with this? We are in that moment where, as we have had all afternoon, the African diaspora is being talked about. There's hundreds of us. There's so many of us, millions of us here, hundreds of organizations doing great work. But we are doing it in silos. We are tearing each other apart as we're doing it, competing with each other, and losing sight of what it is. We have been told, and we know it, that the government, whether it's the Canadian government, whether it's the African Union, whether it's any legit organization, they want to work with people that are organized, cohesive, that was the word, homogeneous. We can't be homogeneous, but we can be collectively working together. So, an organization called the Federation of the Canadian African Diaspora has been registered. My brother said, let us make it actionable, whether the organization is registered. And as individuals, if you are a Canadian diaspora, African diaspora, or even a friend of the African diaspora, Canadian African diaspora, register, put your name down, put something on it, let your voice be heard. We are looking for an organization that to strengthen each other and contribute. We need to have not an organization that says you do this or do the other thing, but to bring us together in one house so that our voices are collected together so we can be heard, not talking over each other, but be heard. The good thing is that this organization is to serve. We are trying to avoid duplication. We are trying to complement each other. If my brother is doing this and my sister is doing this, and together we can do it together and make, instead of 5 people, we are now 10, and we are all moving in the same direction. Then we don't have to complain that this did not get done. We can do it together. This organization is for individuals. Even if we know that individuals are connected to organizations. Like I said to you earlier, I come from Uganda, we have, I don't know, so many tribes. And even as Ugandans in Canada, we have multiple Ugandan associations, tribal organizations. Whereas when somebody sees me, unless I say I'm from Uganda, they can't place me in Uganda. They place me, they'll say that we saw a black woman, probably an African, especially when I'm wearing my African clothes, and I like to represent. Let us come together, brothers and sisters. There will be a way for people to register their interest to come in. We need to build this tribe, a Canadian African tribe that works together, that hears each other, that moves the country of Canada and the continent of Africa that we love together in the same direction. Both our Canadian neighbors and ourselves in Canada, our Canadian children and everything else will benefit. But our brothers and sisters on the continent will benefit because we are equal and we are moving together. I'm done.
That's a good one, my sister, and it's amazing. And I like the fact that you highlighted the idea of us building a Canadian and African tribe, right? Instead of often the tendency for people to try to let us only focus on only one of the tribes that we have, which is the tribe of a country, right? Instead of the different tribes that we can build for ourselves. And I like the fact that you also talked about the idea of us not working in silos, right? So working together, there's something back home in Africa that we say that, when it's easy to break one in a broom, right? It's easy to break it, but once they are together, it's really difficult to break it. So I like the idea of us working together, not in silos. Now it's the opportunity, and this is what I've been looking forward to. for much more interactive kind of a session where, but please make your question very short. If you can, I actually would love for you just to put one concrete solution on the table. Remember, no complaining. Complaining is not a strategy. So put your action on the table and let's put very concrete and actionable thing on the table that will move us forward. Thank you so much. Okay.
All right, I'm here again.
Hello, Professor Tieku. If you wouldn't mind, I think I can help you with calling people to the mic.
Please do that. Okay, co-moderator, you take care of those in the room, and I'll try and check those.
Thank you. I'll say that gladly. Okay. Yes,
three people at a time, please. Eddie.
Professor Grant was my professor with you. You are here. But the stage is giving marks out. Yeah. With your permission, please, may I say something very important from a practical point of view? I'm talking here. I want to give my experience as an advisor, the Minister for Africa and Latin America. Many years ago, Zelensky in Alberta, I was part of the organization through my minister for foreign affairs at that time. My experience that we African are not organized at that time. This community will come to my boss and lobby. The Arabs will come and lobby. The Ukrainian will come and lobby. The Kosovan will come and lobby. I cannot sit free because there's no confidentiality. My mission in Ukraine, President War 14 and 19, the head of the mission was Ukrainian. Why? Because we have more than 2.5 Ukrainian well organized in Toronto and Edmonton, the lobby for the Harvard government to sponsor that mission. I'm giving you the facts as an insider. So in 2008, the African Diaspora the African community decided to form African Diaspora Organization of Canada, supported by the South African ambassador, Dr. Nkomo, the Dean of African called here, Chidea, Lesotho, Ghana, UK, then all of them 36, they supported it. And we got over $100 million from Harvard government to go around the country and register Africans, how many African diaspora living in Canada. What is that their specialty? Medicine, engineers, and so forth. And Minister Kenny was heading that portfolio, and South African ambassador came to us and said, hey, look, I needed to have engineers for 2010 World Cup. You can get those engineers from Canada, we're ready to pay them as an expertise. So I'm giving this as a record. What I'm trying to suggest here is that we should not reinvent the wheel. Let us go back and see why African diaspora Day. The documents are there. Everything that Frank said, Dr. Thomas said, and all are there. The things are online. Let's revisit it and see what went wrong with African diaspora organizations. What can be recovered? And then we move on. Right? Yeah. So this is my honest appeal to you. We are missing. We're outside the football game. I'm talking to you about the referee has a footballer. If you're not in the game, you're not to tell me the result of the game. Currently, we are big in that's what we're not organized. The election is coming next fall, next spring. I guarantee you, if we're not mobilizing ourselves, again, we're going to come back to the same square one, and we say, let's go back and organize ourselves and be a political force. Because when you're organized, you go to the politician and say, hey, I have X number of the people. Can you support my cause? If not, I'm not going to vote for you. This is what they used to do. Thank you. Yeah.
I think I'm already on the mic.
Yes, you are.
Thank you. My name is Hector Addison. I'm a Chief Servant Officer of African Canadian Association of Ottawa. The organization sprang up as a result of, I know ADAC.
Increase the volume on your mic.
Well, maybe I should speak louder. Yeah, so African Canadian Association is an umbrella organization, and we knew from the very beginning that for Africa diaspora to be able to pick up and then fight for our rights, not only here, but also make sure that we develop the continent. We need to come together. So we started, it's an umbrella organization of all the 54 African associations. African associations exist everywhere. So we brought all of them together under one common umbrella. Canadian government has been calling on us anytime they need something African. They call us. We are well known, we are well established. Now, what we wanted to do was to duplicate it, because you realize that if you want to build a strong organization, you must have a good foundation. It's very difficult for somebody to sit in their room and set up an organization and try to recruit people. It doesn't work. The experience shows that it has to organically come from the bottom up. And that is why Federation of Black Canadians did not succeed. And that's because somebody created it from the top and expected people to join. It didn't work. But knowing that Africans already are self-organized with associations, every country has an association. They may not be doing well, but they have an association. When the Sudanese come here, they want to go to the Sudanese Association for help. When a Nigerian gets here, they want to go to Nigerian Association for help. So we organize these organizations. And the way we are doing it is to fight the government, not fight the government, lobby the government. One way we did it was about trade. We lobbied the government for Canada, buy and sell Canada, to be able to allocate a percentage into Black businesses to be able to supply goods to the federal government. They gave us 1%. Up to now, we haven't been able to meet our quota. That is what it means is that we are not self-organizing. We said we should set up joint ventures so we can supply government. Canadian government buys billions of dollars goods from Tieku. Because we are not organized, there is a money on the table we're left behind. For the past 3 years, Canadian government has spent about $1 billion on the people of African descent. Okay, through either phase coalition, giving money for entrepreneurs to be able to do the work. But because we are so divided and we are not organized, we can't do it. We do events, and I always say events like this should bring us together, but that should not be the end of itself. We should have proper mechanism for which we get things done. We have a World Conference coming up on October the 11th, Black World Conference, making sure that people who want to be entrepreneurs, people who want to develop their businesses, increase their businesses, are able to have the resources in the room. We partner with BDC, TD Bank, and different organizations to be able to do that. But we need to organize ourselves around, at least in the interim, around our own country associations. Because if you are part of the Nigerian associations, you will know about African Canadian Association. If you are part of the Sudanese association, you will know. And so that is what we should do. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much. Yes. Please, we are going to take 2 more questions. And with due respect to everyone, please keep your questions very, very short. And please, I'm looking at the time right now, and I actually need to catch a plane at 6 o'clock to DC. So I may have to step out when it is dragging, please. I wanted to say that. So please, 30 seconds each.
Excellent.
Okay. This is just contribution, concrete contribution. First one, to go to business federation, you need to be organized yourself. So these are some contributions. You have this book here. If you go in, you will find we create in Montreal a fund for the diaspora. You check it. Second, you already see in the we are going to have a next forum, but for that we create a bureau, trade bureau in Montreal. If you want to make trade with Africa, you can go there.
Okay.
By myself. I work with company. Company come to say, we need to go for infrastructure. I say, no, I don't want to go with you. We need to create together a company. So we set a new company for the large company, international one, I'm the representative for Africa. This is how to do business with Africa. And to finish, I have a son who is a lawyer in San Francisco. We went last summer in Africa, in Togo, and he come back only in 1 year. We set an international tourism for Togo. We call it Togo Tours. In 1 year, we have already set a Togo Tours company to make tourism with us. So we have to be concrete, not say we have to do this, organize yourself before going to the federation. This is
Thank you so much. Yes, please.
My question is on readiness. So, readiness.
Readiness.
Are we ready? Question I want to ask. Knowing that, for example, we have a lot of networks, but people, most Africans that we see around, depend on the network to serve their purpose, like in diaspora. So they believe in what they take from the network rather than what they give in the give, and that is common. So how can we first scale all these informal networks to become formal? We don't want to start from top to bottom. I want to start from bottom up. How can we turn that into becoming a structure that is useful? Then two, how can we address the mentality of I have to gain something? Or is that, how can we work with it if it's, why do I belong to the organization if I believe I have to get something from it and nothing is coming from it? So can we turn that around, or can we just stick with that and work with it?
Thank you very much for being ready. Yes, please.
Can you hear me? Okay, perfect. I don't have a long introduction. I'm just a student at Univeristy. Essentially, my question is, just to keep it short, like, as a 23-year-old, I know what I want to do. I want to work, let's say, in global affairs, international relations, hopefully represent Canada in the Middle East or particularly East Africa, ideally. So I guess my question would be, where do young people like us really go? Because I feel like, I can only speak for myself, but I feel like we're kind of lost. There's not a lot of organizations that are out there recruiting young people. There's not a lot of options. Even when there's events, you look and you're like, I would love to attend. And then the fee is like $500 to attend. If you're a student, you can't really do that. So I guess for us, we feel a little lost. This event is amazing. Thank you for having it. But where do we go? I guess young people feel a little lost. Thank you.
I think, yes.
I think that young boy, he touched exactly when I was his age, and we met John Gretzky in 1992 in his office. And we come up with a plan that how we can be part of Canada services. At that time, there was not a single Canadian who was working at that time in Canada services. Therefore, we must say thanks for John Gretzky, who played a role here. You mentioned that. And I'm very proud of you what you did. And a lot of us come to Canada after that, and now wherever sector that we go, there's Afro-Canadians working, and we must be part of that. The families who sacrificed it for the last 8 years, also we must thank them for that, who produced a lot of taxpayers, Canadian taxpayers. And for the other things, for Canada-Africa trade and all of this, that depends on what my sister from Uganda mentioned exactly. It is up to us. It is a profit market. Well, the Canadian companies can profit from us, from Canadian companies in Africa, and the Canadian Canadian companies in Africa can benefit here. And we have to see on that angle. And remember this, we lost that opportunity when conservatives come to power. They completely disconnect from us in Africa and Canadian relationship. Yes. We know that. And also there is a fear now that will come back again. We have to focus that as well. The final thing that I want to mention is we already have now a very powerful organization we call Africa Study Group. We must come to that umbrella, all of us, and then focus on that and then help. And I want to thank Cheryl what he did for the last 3 months. He didn't stop people. And I'm thanking what he did. And we must focus on that. And the other final one I want to mention is there is a task that for the African embassies in Canada. For the last 35 years, I always see 2 ambassadors or 3 ambassadors that come to our meetings. We are telling you guys, African ambassadors, to know who you are, who you are representing, and what are your tasks are, and you must come up all the CIC meetings, Africa and Canada meetings. You guys are in your houses and your offices. I don't know what is your POR that your country send you here. You must show up all the meetings. Always, I see 2 ambassadors or 3 ambassadors coming to the meetings. And also the final ones, we did almost 4 times over the last 10 years, Africa, Canada, business shows. None of the shows are candidates. Therefore, it is our time. Canada is ready for us. We are ready for that. And we already agreed and state that we can benefit all of this. Thank you.
Thank you so much for, I think we should.
And at 3 o'clock. We are 3:15 and we are somewhere 3:43 right now. So please, I'm going to take just one more question and she's already at the mic. And I'm going to hand over to Professor Tieku. I hear there are some questions online. So please, if you can see those questions, please can you see those questions? Professor Tieku, can you see the questions online?
There are, I don't think that on this specific one, there were a couple of people who put in questions, but I think it was for the first panel. So on this panel, I haven't seen any hand up. Emery's hand has been there, but I think unless maybe there's something else that has been sent to those handling it, but
so by the power that
let's take one more because the Deputy Minister has been very patient staying with us. So let's take one more and then I'll come back to you and then we'll have 30 seconds to respond to it and then we should wrap it up so that the Deputy Minister, we can hear from the Deputy Minister. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much. By the power that you have vested in me as a co-moderator, I take 2 more questions, one from the lady at the mic and the other lady here, and then we are your questions, please.
Thank you. Sorry, I'm Victoria Shore. I work with Susan Namalingua. I hope that this will be taken as a humble outsider, because obviously I am who I am. I've been around a lot, or talking a lot about how diverse Africa is, and that is true. That is also where humans have existed the longest, so it is where we have the most diversity in genetics, in language, and everything else that is human. That is normal. I would like people to focus on the fact that that is a strength. As a humble outsider, that is a strength that I think you all shouldn't discount. And you should all take note of that. Diversity in opinions gives you a strength. That is it. It's not a question.
Thank you very much. That was very powerful.
I don't have a question, but I have something to say. My name is Elise. I'm born in the Ivory Coast, but I've been in Canada for almost like 8 years. Everywhere I go, I never label myself as an Ivorian. I label myself as an African woman because I've accepted myself not just as an Ivorian, but as representing Africa. So we that we are here today, are we willing to stop labeling ourselves as like Cameroonian, Ivorian, this, and accept ourselves as African? But when we go out there, as this beautiful woman said, we're not being looked as like, oh, I'm from Uganda or Ivory Coast. We're being seen as Black people. And every Black person gets treated most of the time the same. So if we want to elevate, if we want to grow, if we want to wake up, we need to put our ego aside and accept ourselves to be one. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. So that ends the questions from the floor. And I would like to make just a quick comment. I think it is very important that we don't send mixed messages to the Canadian government. It is absolutely important that we do not send mixed messages at all to the Canadian government. Because the process, as you can tell, the government is going through a process to develop, we don't know the name yet. But in doing so, they need clear, concrete direction from the African diaspora. And it is absolutely important that we do not send mixed messages. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor Akuffo. Actually, I should just stop this professor thing, right? It's not me, right? I'm very informal in the way I operate. So I'm going to go, I think, from the reverse, from the speakers. So Susan, 30 minutes remark, and then Templar, and then Professor Akuffo. You just have 30 minutes. What, in terms of your response, what concrete action can you put on the table based on the questions, the comment that came from the floor? That should be the take-home message for anyone who is listening here. Thank you. Susan.
I know you meant 30 seconds, not 30 minutes. That's right. Because I didn't use that. But I only have one thing to add, and I already said it. We need to get together. We have a mechanism in place to speak as one voice and build that tribe. Instead of saying, I could spend time and tell you what I'm doing, and give myself a flag. That's not the purpose of what you're trying to do. You're trying to come together and speak as one. And we have a mechanism in place, so let's do it.
Thank you, my brother. My brother is next. Templar.
Students. Students still here? I got a couple seconds. Come and find me. I have a lot of mentors for you. And I'll make sure you can access all the opportunities. Are we ready? Absolutely. Absolutely ready. The second part of the question is important. How do we change the mentality of it's about being kind of a situation? I've been two kinds of people, my practices all the time. They're people who will just sacrifice their time, energy, and resources for something they're never going to benefit from. And there are those who are interested in taking, and that's okay, for businesses. Ultimately, what we need is kind people, right? And people think about each other first. Mr. Hector Addison, I think that your organization needs a stronger platform. I'm available to reach out to you. And the first element I want to mobilize, and I agree, that's something really important we continue to do, is mobilize.
Okay, thank you so much. And Professor Akuffo, Edward, you have the last word.
All right. I think I will say that at this point, we need to support what the Canadian government is doing. I think in the study of Canadian foreign policy, since I came to this country, but it's 22 years now, I've never seen a process of this nature, going on and becoming so public, and a lot being said and a lot being written about. I think that the Canadian government is up to something, and we need to support that. We need to provide the support that the government needs to be able to put in place that strategy or approach or framework or strategic partnerships, whichever way you call it. But I will end by making a very strong recommendation that, as Professor Tettey said, name doesn't matter. Identity is very, very important. Let's call it a strategy. Strategy is not a bad. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, all of you, for that wonderful presentation and answering the questions. I think what I'm taking from this is that, number one, we are ready, we are prepared to engage, and number three, we want a platform to engage with the Canadian government. We want to strengthen the relationship, and we're hoping that the Canadian government will provide us with a platform to be able to engage. And we don't want to work in silos anymore. We know that we are diverse. It makes us very strong. We should be. and therefore that should not be a weakness, and we are prepared to engage. So on that note, I'd like to thank all of you for participating, although I'm just way all the way I'm speaking from London, Ontario. I've really enjoyed the conversation, and I'm really looking forward to hearing from the Deputy Minister. Thank you so much, and I look forward to interacting with all of you at some point.
Merci beaucoup, Professor Tieku. Thank you so much for the excellent comment. Before continuing, I just wanted to mention that we have aiming for weekend on Montreal to join us here, and we have the president of the community, Malian Association, who came from Montreal to join us. And Mr. Montreal, merci beaucoup d'avoir fait le déplacement. Merci à vous. Et vous adresserez nos compliments aux membres de la communauté qui n'ont pas pu faire le déplacement. Nous restons entièrement à leur disposition pour tout le reste. And before passing the floor to our friend, our sister, our leader, I want us to draw your attention to something. The Canadian African diaspora. We should always keep in mind that diversity is a fact. Inclusion is a choice. Equity is the law. Let's keep in mind. And please, there is no alternative for us to come together. We are here, one of the points is to find out, to find out how to come together, to be Canadian, to help Canada, Africa. That's what the people expect from us. Not to have thousand positions on African issues, to have a kind of system-wide organization, system-wide coordination. Let go over our differences. Don't let people use whatever could be perceived as a fact that we are divisive. We are divided. We are divided. When I was talking, when I was preparing, when the Africa Study Group was preparing this session, we talked to many people. And some people didn't say, oh, check, so you are black. Of course I'm black. What is it? You know, we don't know each other. We need to come together for Canada. We are Canadian. We are not half Canadian. We are not super Canadian. We are Canadian. But we need to come together. We need to go over our differences. What unites us is more than what divides us. Please, let me. There is no alternative, whether we call it federation or half federation or whatever. Even the United Nations is not uniting all the countries of the world. That's right. We are not saying that we are creating an organization that will unite everybody, but let's come together with individuals, the diaspora, legally, and especially for international law. The term of diaspora is an individual status. It's not a collective status. Each of us is member of the diaspora. Let's create an organization where individuals should come together. Yes. Not to say I am, some people were telling me, yeah, I am from the diaspora, but I'm Guinean from the south. And I'm Guinean from the, I'm Tutsi from the north of Rwanda. And, you know, let's forget it. It's too divisive. if we love Canada, and I know that we love Canada, if we love Africa, and I know we love Africa, let's come together, let's have a common house where we can do system-wide coordination. Otherwise, it will always be one step forward, two steps backward. And then we will have meetings where people will always come to say, God is doing this, the government is not doing this, blah, 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 blah. Yeah. Stop this. I'm talking to you as a member of the diaspora. And I have the obligation to do this. We have shortcomings. Let's correct this. Let's come together, please. We will have a summary of all the discussion. People were saying here, there is no member of the government here. We have members of the government here. We have people from that who have taken their Saturday to come and stay with us.
Yeah.
Let us accept their presence, share our problem with them. Cheryl is here since 4 hours. We have someone here. Oliphant came. He was in New York 3 days ago. Now he is with us. Now he's going somewhere else. We have ambassadors from Algeria and the Chancellor of Madagascar. They are here to discuss with us. The African Study Group is not a group of diaspora, but we are the largest group dealing with foreign policy issues when it comes to Africa. But the diaspora is one of our main audience. We will continue supporting you, but we will not carry the baby for you. The diaspora has to wake up. Let's go over our differences. Let's work for Canada. Let's work for Canada and Africa. Please don't forget. It's very important. It's the first time we are doing this. If you need the Africa Study Group, we will continue to support you. We will do our best. I spoke with 21 organizations, diaspora organizations, to organize this. I know what I was hearing. I know what they were saying. Not only that, some people were saying, but your name is Czech and you're black. So it doesn't matter. Canadian has no color. Being Canadian is not an issue of color. It's an issue of conviction. Let's go forward. Let's work for Canada and Africa. Please. Now I will give you a note that there were many questions on Bouka. We have Mrs. Cheryl, who is here, and I want to inform you that there was a question about the United Nations, Canada being a member of Africa is going to have a seat or 2 seats. We are going to deal with this. Many people call us in the last 4 days. I have even not been able to talk to the secretariat. They call me and say, the Africa Study Group is dealing with this issue. We will connect with Ottawa. We will put professors together. We will come to discuss this issue. It's a very serious issue, but keep in mind that 20 years ago, the issue was even not on the table. Yes. But today it's on the table. So let's say alhamdulillah, and let's continue. We will organize a debate and we will try to have more discussion on this. Please let us listen now to Cheryl over. He is waiting since 4 hours.
distinguished guests, speakers, members of the Africa Study Group, colleagues. It really is a pleasure to be able to have the opportunity to deliver remarks to you. And I'm going to try, in the course of my remarks, to respond to some of the comments that have been made this afternoon and answer some of the questions. I want to thank the Africa Study Group for organizing the conference. I think that it's been excellent. And Dr. Sheck, thank you very much for your invitation and for your role in that. I would say I declare this a Saturday that is well spent, and I'm just happy to do that. So since I undertook my role as Assistant Deputy Minister for Africa, which was about 1.5 years ago, I've had the opportunity to meet with members of the Africa Study Group on a number of occasions. And I can say that those discussions have always been enriching. They've always left me with more to think about. The Africa Study Group follows what is happening on the continent. It understands why that matters to Canadians. And it is good at articulating why stronger Canada-Africa relations are in Canada's interest. That is an important story to tell. Over the past number of months, we in the Government of Canada have been reflecting on Canada's engagement with African countries and institutions, and we've been listening to many African, Canadian, and international stakeholders because we would like to hear their views, especially about what the opportunities are. Now, we started calculating. I actually asked my team, could you go back and count the numbers and give me the metadata of who we've consulted? One of those figures is that over the past 2 years, we have consulted with over 500 stakeholders. And that has included Canadian diaspora communities. We've also, as part of this process, been reflective and looked back at the past role of the Government of Canada. And we've done that with some pride. We have had strong diplomatic relations across Africa for over 70 years. We've played a key role in Africa's educational, health, and social development, and with strategic engagements in many countries over many decades, and there are some real highlights of that engagement. I know that on a couple of occasions this afternoon, there's been mention of Canada's presidency when we were hosting in Cananaskis, and all of how Canada undertook leadership. And also there's been mention of how Canada has really worked with civil society and used those partnerships strongly, although I do hear you, and I've heard this message before we have about Canadian visibility in Canada itself not being visible. So Parliamentary Secretary Oliphant has said this already, that we're proud of what we've done, but we do understand that there is some room for recalibration. And we need to move towards more multifaceted partnerships, towards stronger relationships, to a greater focus on economic cooperation. And we need to do a better job of having an approach that leverages Canada's strengths. And that includes Canada's people-to-people ties, which are strong and sets Canada apart. And it includes our African diaspora. And we do recognize that when we look at taking an approach, that we need to appreciate and understand the diversity of the continent, not in any way treating it as a monolith. We also know that part of that is working with the regional economic communities and finding ways practically to do that. Au cours des dernières décennies, nous avons assisté à un changement global de paradigme, caractérisé par un nouvel équilibre des dynamiques du pouvoir. Dans ce monde, on constate l'évolution dans laquelle nous vivons. L'Afrique joue un rôle de plus en plus grand. It is in Canada's interest to invest in relationships on the continent. And I really liked that expression that was referred to, investing in collaboration. That really resonated with me. It's through stronger partnerships bilaterally in international organizations that together we can foster prosperity and security for Canadians and Africans alike. It's really quite fascinating, and I know the Parliamentary Secretary already mentioned this on demographics, but while the world is aging, 70% of Sub-Saharan Africa is under the age of 30. And it's projected that there will be an increase of 740 million people on the African continent by 2050. That represents the world's fastest increase in a working age population. There is a lot of potential in that. With the right training and with employment opportunities, these young people stand to contribute to their economies and to further drive prosperity on the continent. For Canada, this represents a growing market, increased labor market supply, and we know that the time is now to focus on Africa's youth. I was recognizing the professor's point that you mentioned focusing and recognizing, but I also understand that seeing something is not the same as actualizing it. And so when I say that, I'm as much talking about making it real and actualizing it as seeing the opportunities. African economies are growing rapidly with infrastructure and productivity levels that are moving ever closer to those of developed economies. Meaningful partnerships with Africa can secure more opportunities for Canadian exporters and investors to share in the continent's vast economic potential, delivering supply chain resilience, including with regard to critical minerals, job creation, and inclusive economic growth. Africa is also becoming vitally important in the global security landscape. Canada, part of its past is having made contributions in capacity building, training, delivering good governance that are aligned with the express needs of African partners on priorities, and that needs to continue and strengthen. This has been on areas such as counterterrorism and violent extremism, conflict prevention, and support for African-led peace operations. Someone asked about peace mediation. This is an area in which there are examples from the past when Canada has engaged in supporting peace mediation. Just as an example, when it comes to the Sudan peace process, we've been working to support how civil society can organize itself to engage and participate in peace mediation processes through ATACADEM. And also our ambassador for women, peace and security recently traveled to Geneva, where she participated in talks and facilitated the inclusion of civil society, in particular women, in being engaged in those peace talks. We also played a fairly large role in the Mozambique process, peace process as well. There are several examples. It's something that we commit to continue to do and see ourselves, at least for now, having a nation, making sure that civil society are a part of those processes. Les partenaires africains de même que les solutions africaines sont essentielles à la promotion de la démocratie et des droits de l'homme, à la création d'occasions de croissance économique inclusive et à la lutte contre le surendettement, ainsi que la lutte contre le changement climatique sur le continent. The statistics on the carbon capture potential of Africa are just quite astonishing and need to be leveraged. Le gouvernement du Canada continue de travailler avec ses partenaires africains au sein des organismes multilatéraux tels que le G7, le G20, les Nations Unies, les banques de développement, le Commonwealth et la francophonie. Leveraging long-standing ties between our populations, we can build on the economic and cultural contribution of Canadian African communities to Canada. Il n'y a jamais eu de meilleur moment pour tirer parti de liens économiques et internationaux profonds dans l'intérêt du Canada et des pays africains. En tant qu'acteur important, la diaspora africaine au Canada a joué un rôle déterminant dans la construction et l'approfondissement de ces liens. I would like to drill down on this one because I feel like this afternoon I heard so much and so many ideas and views in particular about the role of diaspora communities and how that can interact with what the government of Canada does. I'm in agreement that by leveraging our diaspora communities, we can do a better job of building our intercultural capacity. And I think that that's an opportunity that we should seize. I also see that engaging more between the government of Canada and diaspora communities, there's an opportunity for those communities to share their perspectives and for that to inform government of Canada policies and approaches. And that's very important. I always did find it quite astonishing, if you really think about it already, the power that the diaspora has. When you look at the remittances, the figure was already given today, but it's actually a tremendous investment on the continent that's coming from Canadians of African descent. And recently immigrated Canadians. I think also I have my own experiences personally about learning from diaspora members. Even one of my own ministers, Minister Hussein, who is Canadian but who was born in Somalia. Since I've started working in this job, I've had the opportunity on a number of occasions to travel to African countries with the minister. And I'm thinking of one time in particular where we were in Nairobi and we had a roundtable discussion with Somali representatives, because that's where we're based. Our representative is based in Nairobi for Somalia. And I think I was at that time, just what I had taken away from that conversation was how profound the work is in Somalia to be rebuilding and into doing that institution building. But also, when I was listening to the members of that roundtable, I couldn't actually believe how much was being accomplished. And Minister Hussein said to me, as a Somali Canadian, he said, Somalians are really entrepreneurial. And I could appreciate that. I could actually see it, but for me, it was just a moment where I was learning more myself. I'll also say that I agree with you that I think that the more that the diaspora in Canada is organized, the easier it actually is for the government of Canada to have that interaction. And I think that it's really, I have a couple of things. I've also taken the point that in the government, there's rotationality and then it's also there's elections, etc. So it is absolutely true that when you deal with someone and you forge those networks and those relationships, unfortunately, that person is most likely going to be moving on and then you'll have to start over with somebody new. So the more that these relationships can be systematized, I think that that's the more that they're sustainable and then it can withstand all of those personnel changes. The first 7 years that I worked in the government of Canada, I actually worked in the Department of Indigenous Services Canada, that's what it's called now. My job was that I was working in federal, provincial, territorial Indigenous relations. And so I was a negotiator. I was negotiating on a number of things, including education agreements. And so for many of those years, a primary role of my responsibility in the government of Canada was to consult with representatives and community members. There were 5 major national Indigenous organizations that we would go to, and then there were specific community groupings, and they were our go-to people. And because that was systematized, it was very helpful for us to undertake that work. So I'm just sharing that kind of personal experience that I've had in outreach, being a public servant. And I also just wanted to respond to the students about opportunities at Global Affairs Canada. Because we absolutely welcome the interest of students and of members of the African diaspora in Canada who might be interested in working with Government Canada or Global Affairs Canada. That's really exciting to me. I can say that we have a number of our staff in the Africa branch, but also in Global Affairs Canada writ large that are of African descent, and it enriches our organization, and we really value it. There are, and I can point you to links where there is information available about how to find employment with the Government of Canada or Global Affairs. Global Affairs is a little bit idiosyncratic because we also have the Foreign Service, and so there's entries, and this is kind of regularizing again, where you can kind of join an intake to become a Foreign Service officer if it's of interest to you to be a diplomat and to represent Canada abroad. That's something also that I feel very proud of, is that now more and more, when you look at Canadian diplomats who are our ambassadors or high commissioners, that are our staff members working in our embassies and high commissions, it's more diverse than ever. And some of them were not born in Canada, they were born in other countries, but they actually, there's a number of them that are high commissioners and ambassadors in Africa, and I have regular conversations with them. And one recently, he said, it was my dream to come to Canada, and now I'm representing Canada in another country, and it felt pretty amazing. So we really want to support that. And there are also mentorship opportunities. So far, I participated in a number of different mentorship approaches, one of them run by the Black Diplomats Academy. This past year, there was a young woman named Fabiola who I mentored. She is from Rwanda, but is now a Canadian, and I've worked with her over the past year talking about her career ambitions. And so there's other ways in which we can support young people moving to the Government of Canada. I'll just conclude with some general messages to let you know that I've been listening really, really carefully and that the government of Canada hears you. We understand, and I think you communicated it really clearly, that this is a long-term endeavor. This is a true commitment that we're talking about here. The other thing that I've heard loud and clear is that this is all about action. This is not about rhetoric. And so we take these comments in that spirit and understand that. And also that the moment is now. I truly believe that. I actually truly believe that the moment is now. I feel privileged that I've been given the opportunity to undertake this role at this particular time. And I commit to you guys that in my capacity as Assistant Deputy Minister, that I will continue to push and move this forward to all the extent that I can. And so I will just end it there. I want to say thank you very much. I really did appreciate hearing from you and participating in these.
Thank you. Merci, Cheryl et merci d'être resté avec nous aussi longtemps que possible. Nous apprécions ça de tout nos cœurs. It's highly appreciated that he was supposed to be a station for here now. And we are almost 9 years now. Merci. And thank you to Honorable Oliphant. I know that we have to be. This is a first step. We never had this. And as I say, the African Study Group is not a group of diaspora. But I am not the president of the African Study Group. I am from the diaspora. I have the obligations somehow. And our diplomats, our members of the African Study Group, many of them are former diplomats who were working in Africa. But we have also recognized they have been pushing for this meeting. And the Canadian International Council has been encouraging me to organize this. I will have Hector, thank you for mobilizing the community in Ottawa. And Victoria, I know that, I don't know if you are still here. Just like, I just wanted to tell that we consider her as part of the diaspora, as the African diaspora. The African diaspora is not only a question of color, it's a question of feeling too. So we have many people who are not from, who don't have any African origins and roots. But I would say many of them live Africa more than I do. And they know Africa more than many of us. And we consider them also as African. And among those, I will name those people who created the African Study Group. Bouka, many people. Okay, so merci to Professor Akuffo and Professor Tieku, I'm sorry, for their excellent moderation. On behalf of the African Study Group of the Canadian International Council, I would like to thank our panelists for their excellent performance and for sharing so many perspectives with us. I would like to thank the audience for their complaints. It's loud. We have heard it, and when we went to see Cheryl and Mr. Oliphant also, we told them about the frustration. But as I say, we will now make a calculation of everything what has been said here. We try to have an action plan instead of action. We will have a summary of everything what has been said here. We will try to work out with the leaders of the panel and some of the people that we didn't know, but we know now. We will come together. The African Study Group will help you, but help us to help you. We are not, as I say, a diaspora group. We are a think tank. We are without a think tank group on foreign policy here in Canada when we come to Africa. And we are also the only. So let's go forward. Let's go forward. This should not be a session that we will just put aside. Let's work on the action plan. Let's prepare a document. Let's have a summary. There have been a Toronto declaration that was last year. We will prepare a kind of Ottawa declaration based on what happened here. We will share with GAC. And then we will, from that declaration, we will establish a kind of action plan. We will, what I am saying is that I am encouraging the diaspora to take ownership of the decision-making process. Help the government do something and then let us help the government. Let us go forward. What we call in French, leadership should not be the option. We should be innovative, we should be creative, and we should keep in the interest of Canada and Africa. As a, we should keep that in our mind. Je vous remercie, and I would especially like to thank you for your great cooperation in preparing this roundtable and talking about the panelists. I have most appreciated our discussions, not least in the choice of your topics, which has enabled the African Study Group to avoid duplication and create a certain intellectual complementarity in today's discussions. Chers panélistes, je vous dis merci éperdument au nom du Conseil international du Canada. I would like to thank our colleagues from the African Study Group Secretariat. And they have been working very hard. Very hard. And I would like to thank Hector again. You are the first person I went to see when we started organizing this. But before that, we went to see Cheryl, who called me into bed to make sure that we go in the right direction. And again, I thank you because from the beginning we said we should make sure that we don't come here to have a list of complaints, but to have a list of actions. And that's exactly what we are going to do. Merci pour ça, Philippe, merci pour ça, Philippe, du centre de recherche de Saint-Paul. He was here today. He was here last year. The next Africa Study Group the next webinar of Africa Study Group will be soon announced on our website. And I will encourage you. We are members of the Canadian International Conference. And I would advise each of you to be member of the Canadian International Conference. It's an organization that exists in 2027. And they kind of bridge between the Canadian people and the government when it comes to foreign policy issues. Thank you so much. It has been so long, but I think the quality of this is this is the first time that we do it. I promise you, it's not going to be the last time. And I will highly appreciate the 2026 organization I was talking to keep contact and so that we can make a follow-up action plan. Excellency, Monsieur l'Ambassadeur, Madame a chargé l'affaire de Madagascar. Nous vous remercions. C'est contre la convention de Vienne que nous vous gardions pendant tout ce temps. Mais nous vous remercions d'être restés avec nous. Nous vous apprécions beaucoup. This will be all for today. I wish you good time. And those people who are at the University of taken the job in Dakar, they sent me the message that they were sitting there with 20 people. They lost the connection. So, shukran.